Agartha, the lost kingdom inside a hollow earth, lit by an inner sun, guarded by ancient secrets and accessible only through hidden entrances scattered across the most remote corners of our world. Please let us know in the comments where you are watching this history video and what time you are watching it, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for future videos. There is a story that has been told for thousands of years. It has been whispered among monks in the high mountain monasteries of Tibet. It has been written into the sacred texts of Hinduism and Buddhism alike. It has appeared in the journals of military explorers, in the classified reports of governments, in the private letters of scientists, and in the oral traditions of indigenous peoples on every inhabited continent on this planet. It is a story so persistent, so universal, so deeply embedded in the collective memory of the human species, that to dismiss it outright would be to ignore one of the most remarkable threads in the entire tapestry of human belief. The story is this: beneath our feet, beneath the soil and the rock, beneath the mountains and the oceans, beneath everything we think we know about the ground we walk upon, there exists another world, a kingdom, a civilization. A place of light and wisdom and unimaginable age, a realm where beings of extraordinary intelligence have lived for millennia, perhaps for millions of years, undisturbed by the wars and catastrophes and petty struggles that have defined life on the surface. This place has many names. In the Vedic traditions of ancient India, it is called Patala. In Tibetan Buddhism, it is known as Shambhala. In the esoteric teachings of Central Asia, it is called Agartha. And according to the legends, this hidden kingdom is not a metaphor. It is not a spiritual allegory. It is not a fairy tale. It is a real physical place, and the entrance to it still exists, somewhere on the surface of our world, waiting to be found. This is the story of Agartha. And whether you believe it or not, by the time we are finished, you will understand why so many people, across so many centuries, across so many civilizations, have believed that this story is true. To understand the legend of Agartha, we must first understand how old this idea truly is. We are not talking about a modern conspiracy theory. We are not talking about something that was invented in the age of the internet or even in the age of the printing press. The concept of a world beneath the world, a hidden realm inside the body of the earth itself, is among the oldest ideas in human civilization. It predates written history. It predates the construction of the pyramids. It predates the founding of every nation that currently exists on the surface of the earth. The ancient Sumerians, who built what many scholars consider to be the first great civilization in Mesopotamia more than 5,000 years ago, spoke of a place they called the Abzu. The Abzu was described as a vast underground ocean of fresh water, a primordial realm that existed beneath the surface of the earth. But the Abzu was more than just water. It was the domain of Enki, one of the most powerful gods in the Sumerian pantheon. Enki was the god of wisdom, of knowledge, of magic, and of creation itself, and his home was not in the sky. It was not on a mountaintop. It was beneath the earth. The Sumerians believed that Enki dwelt in an underground palace of extraordinary beauty, surrounded by gardens and rivers of crystal-clear water, illuminated by a light that did not come from the sun above, but from some other source entirely. This was not a realm of the dead. This was not an underworld of punishment or darkness. This was a place of life, of wisdom, of civilization more advanced than anything on the surface. The ancient Egyptians had similar beliefs. In their cosmology, the Duat was a vast underground realm through which the sun god Ra traveled each night after setting below the western horizon. The Duat was described in extraordinary detail in texts like the Amjuat and the Book of Gates, which were inscribed on the walls of royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. These texts describe a journey through 12 regions of an underground world, each one populated by gods, spirits, and beings of immense power. The Duat had rivers and lakes. It had cities and palaces. It had landscapes of astonishing variety, deserts and marshes, mountains and valleys, all existing beneath the surface of the earth. And at the center of the Duat there was light. Ra himself brought light into this underground world, illuminating it during the hours of darkness on the surface above. The parallels to the legend of Agartha are striking: a world beneath the earth, cities and civilizations underground, and a source of light, an inner sun, that illuminated this hidden realm. the ancient Greeks contributed their own version of this idea. The philosopher Plato, writing in the 4th century before the Common Era, described a complex system of underground rivers and caverns in his dialogue Phaedo. But it was the broader Greek tradition of the underworld that most closely echoes the Agartha legend. The Greeks did not simply believe in Hades as a place of the dead. They believed in a layered underground world with distinct regions, including the Elysian Fields, a paradise of extraordinary beauty where the most virtuous souls lived in eternal happiness. The Elysian Fields were described as a land of perpetual daylight, with gentle breezes, green meadows, and golden light, even though they existed beneath the surface of the earth. Once again, the same elements appear: a hidden world underground, a place of beauty and wisdom, and a mysterious source of light. The Norse traditions of Scandinavia added yet another dimension to this ancient belief. The Norse cosmology described 9 worlds arranged along the great world tree, Yggdrasil. Several of these worlds existed beneath the surface of the earth. Svartalfheim was the realm of the dark elves and dwarves, master craftsmen who forged magical weapons and artifacts in underground workshops of unparalleled sophistication. Niflheim was a world of ice and mist beneath the roots of Yggdrasil. And Hell was the underground realm of the dead, ruled by the goddess of the same name. But what is most interesting about the Norse underground worlds is the emphasis on craftsmanship, knowledge, and technology. The dwarves of Svartalfheim were not primitive cave dwellers. They were the most skilled artisans in all of the 9 worlds, capable of creating objects that even the gods could not make. This idea that the beings who live beneath the earth possess knowledge and technology far beyond anything on the surface is one of the central pillars of the Agartha legend. The Hindu traditions of India, however, provide perhaps the most detailed and the most explicitly parallel account of an underground kingdom. The ancient Hindu texts describe a realm called Patala, which is divided into 7 underground levels. Each level is described as a separate world, more beautiful and more magnificent than the last. The Vishnu Purana, one of the most important texts in all of Hindu literature, states that the splendor of Patala surpasses even the splendor of heaven. The text describes palaces of gold and jewels, gardens of unimaginable beauty, and a population of Nagas, serpent beings of extraordinary wisdom and power. The Nagas are not depicted as evil or demonic. They are described as highly civilized beings with their own cities, their own governments, their own philosophies, and their own advanced knowledge. And once again, the texts specifically mention that Patala is illuminated, not by the sun above, but by the glow of the jewels worn by the Nagas themselves, and by luminous gems embedded in the ceilings of their underground palaces. The inner sun of Agartha finds its echo here, thousands of years before any European ever heard the name. But it is in the Buddhist traditions of Tibet and Central Asia that the legend of the underground kingdom reaches its fullest and most specific expression. And it is here that the name Shambhala enters the story. Shambhala, the word itself has become synonymous with paradise, with utopia, with the idea of a perfect society hidden from the corruption and chaos of the outside world. But for the monks and lamas and scholars of Tibetan Buddhism, Shambhala is not a vague spiritual concept. It is a specific place with a specific geography, a specific history, and a specific future role to play in the destiny of the world. The primary source of the Shambhala legend in Tibetan Buddhism is the Kalachakra Tantra, one of the most complex and revered texts in the entire Buddhist canon. The Kalachakra Tantra was said to have been first taught by the Buddha himself, not in India, but in the kingdom of Shambhala, to the king of that realm and to a vast assembly of divine beings and enlightened masters. According to the traditional account, the first king of Shambhala, Suchandra, traveled from his hidden kingdom to receive the teachings of the Buddha, and then returned to Shambhala to preserve and practice those teachings in their purest form. The Kalachakra Tantra describes Shambhala in remarkable detail. It is said to be a kingdom shaped like a lotus flower with 8 petals, each petal representing a region of the kingdom. At the center of the lotus is the capital city called Kalapa. Kalapa is described as a city of extraordinary beauty, with palaces made of gold, silver, turquoise, coral, and other precious materials. The palace of the king stands at the very center of the city, and it is made entirely of crystal, so that the king can observe the movements of the stars and planets from within his throne room. The kingdom is surrounded by a ring of snow-capped mountains that serve as a natural barrier, making it invisible and inaccessible to the outside world. But here is where the legend becomes truly remarkable. According to the Kalachakra Tantra, Shambhala is not merely hidden, it is protected. It is said that the kingdom exists in a state that is somehow removed from ordinary reality, not entirely in the physical world, yet not entirely outside of it either. The texts describe it as existing in a kind of dimensional overlap, a place that occupies physical space but cannot be perceived by ordinary senses. Only those who have achieved a certain level of spiritual development can find the entrance to Shambhala. Only those who are pure of heart and clear of mind can see the path that leads to its gates. For everyone else, the kingdom is invisible, hidden in plain sight behind the veil of ordinary perception. This idea that Shambhala exists in a state between the physical and the spiritual has been interpreted in many different ways over the centuries. Some scholars have argued that it is purely metaphorical, that Shambhala represents an inner state of consciousness rather than an outer geographical location. But many Tibetan lamas, including some of the most respected and authoritative figures in the history of Tibetan Buddhism, have insisted that Shambhala is real. The great Tibetan scholar Taranatha, writing in the 16th and 17th centuries, compiled extensive accounts of travelers who claimed to have visited Shambhala. The sixth Panchen Lama, one of the highest-ranking figures in Tibetan Buddhism, wrote a famous guidebook called The Way to Shambhala in the 18th century, providing specific geographical directions for reaching the hidden kingdom. These were not metaphorical directions. They described real mountains, real rivers, real deserts, and real passes through which a traveler would need to journey in order to reach the gates of the kingdom. According to the Panchen Lama's guidebook, the journey to Shambhala begins in Tibet and proceeds northward through increasingly remote and dangerous terrain. The traveler must cross vast deserts, climb over towering mountain ranges, and navigate through treacherous valleys filled with poisonous plants and wild animals. At certain points along the journey, the traveler must perform specific rituals and meditations in order to purify their mind and prepare themselves for what lies ahead. And at the final boundary, the last barrier between the ordinary world and the hidden kingdom, the traveler must pass through a kind of spiritual gateway that can only be opened by those who have achieved the proper state of consciousness. This description has fascinated scholars and explorers for centuries, because while the spiritual elements of the guidebook are clearly rooted in Buddhist practice and belief, the geographical elements are strikingly specific. The Panchen Lama describes landscapes that correspond to real places in Central Asia, the Gobi Desert, the Kunlun Mountains, the Altai Range, and the vast, unexplored regions of northern Tibet and western China. The question that has haunted seekers for generations is this: was the Panchen Lama describing a real journey to a real place, or was he using real geography as a framework for a spiritual allegory? The answer, as we shall see, may be more complex than either interpretation allows. The legend of Shambhala did not remain confined to the monasteries of Tibet. Over the centuries, it spread throughout Central Asia, carried by traders and travelers along the ancient trade routes that connected the civilizations of East and West. And as the legend spread, it evolved. It merged with local traditions and beliefs. It absorbed elements from other cultures and other mythologies. And gradually, a new version of the legend emerged, one that was broader, more elaborate, and more explicitly connected to the idea of a hollow earth. This new version of the legend came to be known as Agartha. The name Agartha, sometimes spelled Agarthi, Agharti, or Asgartha, first appeared in Western literature in the 19th century, but the concept it describes is far older. According to the traditions of Central Asian mysticism, Agartha is not merely a hidden kingdom on the surface of the earth, concealed behind mountains and deserts. Agartha is a kingdom inside the earth, It exists within the very body of the planet, in vast underground caverns and tunnels that stretch for thousands of miles beneath the surface. And at the center of this underground world, providing light and warmth to the kingdom below, there is an inner sun, a luminous sphere that hangs suspended in the hollow center of the earth, bathing the underground landscape in a warm, golden glow. The idea that the earth might be hollow is not as absurd as it might initially sound. Throughout history, serious thinkers and scientists have entertained the possibility. In the 17th century, the great English astronomer Edmond Halley, the same Halley after whom Halley's Comet is named, proposed that the Earth might consist of a series of concentric hollow shells, each one rotating independently, with a luminous atmosphere between them. Halley suggested that this model could explain certain anomalies in the Earth's magnetic field that could not be accounted for by the prevailing theories of his time. He even suggested that the spaces between the shells might be inhabited, and that the aurora borealis, the northern lights, might be caused by luminous gas escaping from the interior of the Earth through thin spots in the crust near the poles. Halley was not a fringe figure. He was one of the most respected scientists of his era, a fellow of the Royal Society, and a personal friend of Isaac Newton. His hollow earth theory was published in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society in 1692, and it was taken seriously by the scientific community for decades. It was only as the science of geology matured in the 18th and 19th centuries that the hollow earth theory was gradually abandoned by mainstream science. But even as scientists moved on to other models, the idea continued to capture the imagination of explorers, writers, and seekers of hidden knowledge. The connection between the hollow earth theory and the legend of Agartha was made explicit by a remarkable figure named Alexander Saint-Yves d'Alvader, a French occultist and political philosopher who lived in the 19th century. In 1886, Saint-Yves published a book called Mission de l'Inde en Europe, the mission of India in Europe, in which he described Agartha in extraordinary detail. According to Saint-Yves, Agartha was a vast underground kingdom governed by a supreme spiritual leader known as the King of the World. This king presided over a council of the most enlightened beings on the planet, and together they guided the spiritual development of all humanity from their hidden seat of power beneath the earth. Saint-Yves claimed that he had received this information from a mysterious Hindu teacher named Harji Sharep, who had initiated him into the secrets of Agartha through a series of private sessions. According to Saint-Yves, Agartha was home to millions of inhabitants who lived in a vast network of underground cities connected by tunnels that extended beneath every continent on Earth. The kingdom possessed technology far in advance of anything on the surface, including machines that could harness the energy of the Earth itself, devices that could communicate across vast distances instantaneously, and vehicles that could travel through the underground tunnels at incredible speeds. But what made Saint-Yves' account truly extraordinary was not the technology or the geography. It was the political and spiritual structure he described. According to Saint-Yves, Agartha was organized as a perfect theocratic state, a civilization in which spiritual wisdom and political authority were perfectly united. The King of the World was not merely a political ruler. He was the supreme spiritual authority of the planet, a being of such profound wisdom and such advanced consciousness that he could perceive the thoughts and intentions of every human being on the surface of the earth. He could see the future. He could read the Akashic records, the supposed cosmic library that contains the complete history of every soul that has ever existed. And from his underground throne, he directed the spiritual evolution of humanity, intervening in surface affairs only when absolutely necessary, and always through agents and intermediaries rather than through direct action. Saint-Yves' book was so controversial that he actually ordered the entire print run destroyed before it could be distributed. Only a handful of copies survived, and these were passed from hand to hand among the initiated, becoming one of the most sought-after texts in the history of Western esotericism. The book was not widely published until after Saint-Yves' death, and when it finally reached a broader audience, it caused a sensation. Here was a detailed account of an underground civilization, complete with geography, politics, religion, and technology, provided by a man who claimed to have received his information from an authentic Eastern source. The question of whether Saint-Yves was telling the truth, or whether he had invented the entire thing, has been debated ever since. But Saint-Yves was not the only Western figure to bring the legend of Agartha to the attention of the outside world. In the early 20th century, another remarkable individual would encounter the legend firsthand, in circumstances that were far more dramatic and far more dangerous than anything Saint-Yves had experienced. His name was Ferdinand Ossendowski, and he was a Polish scientist, writer, and adventurer who found himself caught up in one of the most chaotic and violent periods in the history of Central Asia. In 1920, Ossendowski was fleeing through Mongolia, trying to escape the aftermath of the Russian Revolution and the civil war that had engulfed the former Russian Empire. Mongolia at that time was a place of extraordinary turmoil. The old Qing dynasty that had ruled over Mongolia had collapsed, and the country was caught between the forces of the Chinese Republic, the Russian Bolsheviks, and various Mongolian factions, all competing for control. Into this chaos rode one of the most terrifying and enigmatic figures of the 20th century, Baron Roman von Ungern Sternberg, a Baltic German aristocrat who had styled himself as a living incarnation of the Mongol warlord Genghis Khan, and who was leading a ragged army of white Russian soldiers, Mongolian cavalry, and Tibetan mystics across the steppes of Central Asia. Ossendowski encountered Baron Ungern and his forces during his journey through Mongolia, and he also spent time with Mongolian lamas, Tibetan monks, and Central Asian nomads who told him stories that he would later compile into one of the most famous and controversial travel books of the 20th century, Beasts, Men, and Gods, published in 1922. In this book, Ossendowski describes how, during his travels through Mongolia, multiple independent sources, lamas, herders, tribal leaders, and even Chinese merchants told him about Agartha. They spoke of it not as a legend or a myth, but as a known fact, as real and as certain as the mountains and deserts that surrounded them. Ossendowski writes of an old Mongolian lama who told him, more than 60,000 years ago, a holy man disappeared with a whole tribe of people into the ground and never appeared again on the surface of the earth. Many people have since visited this kingdom, among them Sakyamuni, Undurgeghen, Paspa, Baber, and others. No one knows where it is. Some say it is in Afghanistan, some say it is in India. All the people there are protected against evil, and crime does not exist within its borders. Science has developed there in peace, undisturbed, and nothing on earth can be compared with the knowledge they possess. This subterranean people has reached the highest level of knowledge. Ossendowski was told that the king of the world, the supreme ruler of Agartha, had the power to see everything that happened on the surface of the earth. He was told that the king of the world had appeared before certain lamas and monks at various times throughout history, delivering prophecies and warnings about the future of humanity. He was told that the king of the world had the power to influence the minds of world leaders, to start and stop wars, and to control the forces of nature itself. One of the most striking passages in Ossendowski's book describes an encounter with a Mongolian prince who told him about a time when the king of the world had issued a prophecy about the future. According to this prince, the king of the world had appeared in the main temple of a Mongolian monastery and had delivered a prophecy about the coming century. The prophecy described a period of terrible wars and destruction on the surface of the earth, during which nations would fight against nations, rivers of blood would flow across the continents, and ancient civilizations would be destroyed. But at the end of this period of darkness, the people of Agartha would emerge from their underground kingdom and bring a new era of peace and enlightenment to the surface world. This prophecy, as Ossendowski recorded it, is remarkably specific. It describes events that bear a striking resemblance to the world wars, the revolutions, and the social upheavals of the 20th century. Supporters of the Agartha legend have pointed to this prophecy as evidence that the king of the world possesses genuine foreknowledge of future events. Skeptics have argued that the prophecy is too vague to be meaningful, or that Ossendowski embellished or even fabricated the accounts he recorded. The debate continues to this day. But Ossendowski's account is not the only one. Other travelers through Central Asia in the early 20th century recorded similar stories. The Russian painter and philosopher Nicholas Roerich, who led a famous expedition through Central Asia in the 1920s, also encountered the Shambhala legend repeatedly during his travels. Roerich's expedition took him through the Gobi Desert, across the Kunlun Mountains, through the Altai Range and into Tibet, and at every stop along the way, he was told stories about the hidden kingdom. Roerich was a deeply spiritual man, a follower of theosophy and Eastern mysticism, and he took the Shambhala legend very seriously. In his book Shambhala, In Search of the New Era, published in 1930, he describes how Mongolian and Tibetan sources told him that the entrance to Shambhala was located somewhere in the remote wilderness of northern Tibet or the western Gobi Desert. He was told that certain lamas knew the exact location of the entrance, but would reveal it only to those who were spiritually prepared to make the journey. He was told that the kingdom was protected by powerful forces, both natural and supernatural, that prevented the unworthy from finding it. Roerich also records a remarkable incident that allegedly occurred during his expedition. He describes how, while camped in the mountains of Central Asia, he and his companions observed a golden, luminous object moving across the sky at great speed. The Mongolian guides who were with him immediately identified it as a sign from Shambhala. They told Roerich that such objects were occasionally seen in the sky above Central Asia and that they came from the hidden kingdom. The guide said that the people of Shambhala possessed flying machines that could travel through the sky at incredible speeds, and that these machines were sometimes glimpsed by surface dwellers, though they were usually mistaken for natural phenomena. This detail is extraordinary because Roerich's expedition took place in the 1920s, decades before the modern phenomenon of unidentified flying objects captured the public imagination. Yet here was a report of a luminous, high-speed object in the sky, observed by multiple witnesses and explained by local traditions as a product of advanced underground technology. The accounts of Saint-Yves, Ossendowski, and Roerich are the three pillars upon which the modern Western understanding of the Agartha legend rests. But to fully appreciate the depth and complexity of this legend, we must look beyond these individual accounts and examine the broader tradition from which they emerged. The concept of a network of underground tunnels connecting different parts of the world is one of the most widespread and persistent themes in the Agartha tradition. According to the legend, Agartha is not a single isolated cavern, but a vast, interconnected system of tunnels, chambers, cities, and passages that extends beneath every continent on Earth. These tunnels are said to be immensely old, far older than any civilization on the surface, and they are said to have been created either by natural geological processes over millions of years or by the inhabitants of Agartha themselves, using technology that is beyond our current understanding. The entrances to this tunnel system are said to be located in some of the most remote and inaccessible places on Earth. The most frequently cited locations include the Himalayas, particularly in the regions of Tibet and Nepal, the Gobi Desert of Mongolia, the Andes Mountains of South America, particularly in the regions of Peru and Bolivia, the mountains of Turkey and Kurdistan near the ancient site of Mount Ararat, the deserts of the Sahara in North Africa, certain volcanic islands in the Pacific Ocean, and the polar regions, both the Arctic and the Antarctic. The idea that entrances to the underground world might exist near the poles is particularly interesting because it connects the Agartha legend to one of the oldest and most persistent mysteries in the history of exploration. the question of what lies at the extreme north and south of our planet. For centuries, explorers who ventured into the far north reported strange phenomena that they could not explain. They described warm winds blowing from the north, when all logic suggested that the wind should be colder the further north one traveled. They described open seas of warm water in areas that should have been covered by ice. They described strange lights in the sky, unusual cloud formations, and animal migrations that seemed to defy explanation. And they described a phenomenon that has never been fully accounted for: the fact that in certain regions of the high Arctic, the compass needle does not point north but instead dips sharply downward, as if being pulled toward something beneath the surface of the Earth. These observations have been cited by proponents of the hollow Earth theory as evidence that the Earth has openings at its poles, vast circular apertures through which warm air, water, and light from the interior of the planet escape to the surface. According to this theory, the aurora borealis and the aurora australis, the northern and southern lights, are not caused by charged particles from the sun interacting with the Earth's magnetic field, as mainstream science maintains. Instead, they are caused by the light of the inner sun shining through the polar openings, refracted and scattered by the atmosphere to create the shimmering curtains of color that are visible from the surface. This theory was elaborated in great detail by a number of writers and thinkers in the 19th and early 20th centuries. One of the most influential was Marshall Gardner, who published a book called A Journey to the Earth's Interior in 1913, in which he argued that the Earth was hollow, with openings at both poles and an inner sun approximately 600 miles in diameter at the center. Gardner supported his theory with a detailed analysis of Arctic exploration reports, astronomical observations, and geological data, and he included illustrations and diagrams showing his model of the Earth's interior. Another influential figure was William Reed, who published The Phantom of the Poles in 1906, in which he argued that the North and South Poles do not exist as fixed points on the surface of the Earth. Instead, Reed claimed, the polar regions are actually the rims of vast openings leading into the hollow interior. He argued that explorers who claimed to have reached the poles had actually been traveling along the curving rim of the opening without realizing it, because the curvature was so gradual that it was imperceptible to the human eye. These theories were, of course, rejected by mainstream science, which has accumulated overwhelming evidence that the Earth is not hollow but is composed of a series of dense layers: the crust, the mantle, the outer core, and the inner core, extending all the way to the center of the planet. Seismic data from earthquakes, measurements of the Earth's mass and gravitational field, and direct observations from deep drilling projects have all confirmed the standard model of the Earth's interior. And yet the hollow Earth theory refuses to die. Its proponents argue that the standard scientific model is based on incomplete data and flawed assumptions. They point out that no human being has ever traveled more than a few miles below the surface of the Earth, and that our knowledge of the deep interior is based entirely on indirect evidence, seismic waves, gravitational measurements, and computer models. They argue that there could be vast cavities and chambers within the Earth that our instruments have not detected, and that the existence of such cavities would not necessarily contradict the data we have already gathered. And in recent years, science itself has provided some unexpected support for the idea that the interior of the Earth may be more complex and more mysterious than previously thought. In 2014, a team of scientists published a paper in the journal Science announcing the discovery of a vast reservoir of water trapped in a mineral called ringwoodite, located approximately 400 miles below the surface of the Earth. This reservoir was estimated to contain roughly 3 times the volume of all the oceans on the surface of the planet. The discovery stunned the scientific community and raised profound questions about what else might exist in the deep interior of the Earth that we have not yet discovered. Similarly, advances in seismology have revealed the existence of enormous underground structures that scientists have dubbed large low shear velocity provinces, vast blobs of material, thousands of miles across, sitting at the base of the Earth's mantle near the boundary with the outer core. These structures are denser than the surrounding mantle material, and their origin and composition remain a mystery. Some scientists have speculated that they are remnants of an ancient planetary collision. Others have suggested that they are composed of material fundamentally different from anything else in the Earth's interior. Whatever they are, their existence demonstrates that the interior of our planet is far from the simple, uniform structure that was assumed for much of the 20th century. None of this proves that the Earth is hollow or that Agartha exists, but it does suggest that our understanding of the Earth's interior is still evolving, and that there may be surprises lurking in the depths that we have not yet imagined. Let us return to the legend itself and examine some of the most remarkable claims that have been made about Agartha and its inhabitants. According to the tradition, the people of Agartha are not ordinary human beings. They are described as a race of beings who are far more advanced than surface humanity, not only in terms of technology, but also in terms of spiritual development, consciousness, and understanding of the laws of nature. Some versions of the legend describe them as the descendants of ancient civilizations that once flourished on the surface of the Earth, civilizations that were destroyed by catastrophic events and that retreated underground to preserve their knowledge and their way of life. The most commonly cited ancestor civilization is Atlantis. According to this version of the legend, the Atlanteans were a highly advanced civilization that existed thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of years ago. They possessed technology that rivaled or exceeded our own, including the ability to harness the energy of crystals, to manipulate the forces of gravity, and to travel through the air in flying vehicles. But the Atlanteans grew arrogant and corrupt, misusing their power and bringing destruction upon themselves. When their civilization was destroyed by a great flood, an earthquake, a volcanic eruption, or some other cataclysm, the surviving Atlanteans retreated underground, carrying with them their knowledge, their technology, and their determination to build a better society in the hidden spaces beneath the earth. Another version of the legend attributes the founding of Agartha to the Lemurians, another supposed ancient civilization that existed even before Atlantis. Lemuria, also known as Mu, was said to be a vast continent in the Pacific Ocean that was home to a spiritually advanced civilization. When Lemuria sank beneath the waves, the survivors are said to have migrated to various parts of the world, including the underground realms where they established the kingdom of Agartha. According to some traditions, the Lemurians were taller and more physically robust than modern humans, and they possessed psychic abilities, telepathy, clairvoyance, and the ability to manipulate matter with their minds that are far beyond the capabilities of surface dwellers. Whether the founders of Agartha were Atlanteans, Lemurians, or some other ancient race, the tradition is consistent on one point. The inhabitants of Agartha have had thousands of years, perhaps hundreds of thousands of years, to develop their civilization without interruption. While the surface world has been ravaged by wars, plagues, natural disasters, and the rise and fall of empires, Agartha has been a place of continuous, unbroken development. The Agarthans have had the luxury of time, vast, unimaginable stretches of time, in which to perfect their society, their technology, and their understanding of the universe. The result, according to the legend, is a civilization that is so far in advance of our own that it is almost impossible for us to comprehend. The Agarthans are said to have mastered the manipulation of energy at levels that we can barely conceive. They can harness the electromagnetic field of the Earth itself, using it as a source of limitless, clean power. They have developed vehicles that travel through the underground tunnels at speeds that make our fastest trains look primitive. They have perfected the science of medicine to such an extent that disease is unknown in Agartha, and the inhabitants live for hundreds, perhaps thousands of years. They have achieved a level of psychic development that allows them to communicate telepathically across vast distances, to perceive events on the surface of the earth without any physical instruments, and to project their consciousness to any point in space or time. But perhaps the most remarkable claim about the inhabitants of Agartha is their spiritual development. According to the tradition, the Agarthans have achieved a level of consciousness that transcends the duality of good and evil, self and other, matter and spirit, that defines the experience of surface humanity. They have attained what the Buddhist traditions would call enlightenment, a state of perfect clarity, perfect compassion, and perfect understanding. And it is from this state of enlightenment that they guide the spiritual evolution of humanity, working behind the scenes to steer the surface world toward its eventual awakening. The figure at the center of the Agartha legend, the being who personifies the wisdom and the power of the underground kingdom, is the king of the world. This figure appears under various names in different traditions. In the Buddhist traditions of Tibet and Mongolia, he is sometimes identified with Maitreya, the future Buddha who is destined to appear on earth to teach the Dharma and usher in a new age of enlightenment. In the Hindu traditions, he is sometimes identified with Sanat Kumara, an advanced being who is said to have come to Earth millions of years ago from the planet Venus to guide the spiritual evolution of humanity. In the esoteric traditions of Central Asia, he is simply known as the ruler of the underground world or the king of Agartha. Saint-Yves Dalvader, in his account, described the king of the world as a being of almost inconceivable spiritual authority. He wrote that the king of the world was surrounded by a court of 12 ministers, each one responsible for a different aspect of the governance of Agartha and the guidance of surface humanity. These 12 ministers corresponded, in Saint-Yves' system, to the 12 signs of the zodiac and the 12 fundamental forces of the universe. Together with the king of the world, they formed a council of 13, a number that appears repeatedly in the esoteric traditions of both East and West as a symbol of completion and cosmic authority. Ossendowski's account provides additional details about the king of the world. He describes how a Mongolian lama told him that the king of the world had appeared in a Mongolian monastery centuries ago, glowing with an inner light, and had delivered prophecies about the future of humanity. The Lama told Ossendowski that the king of the world had the power to make himself visible or invisible at will, to appear in multiple places simultaneously, and to communicate directly with the minds of those he chose to address. He was not a physical being in the ordinary sense, but neither was he purely spiritual. He existed in a state between the two, embodied, yet not bound by the limitations of the physical body. The concept of the king of the world raises profound questions about the nature of authority, wisdom, and the relationship between the seen and the unseen dimensions of reality. If such a being exists, if there is truly a supreme intelligence at the center of the earth, guiding the destiny of humanity from the shadows, then the entire history of our world takes on a different meaning. Every war, every revolution, every great leap forward in science, philosophy, or art, every catastrophe and every renaissance would need to be re-examined in light of this hidden influence. The great movements of history would not be the random products of chance and human ambition. They would be the carefully orchestrated unfolding of a plan conceived by a mind of almost infinite wisdom, working on a timescale of millennia. This is, of course, a staggering claim, and it is one that most people would be inclined to dismiss. But the Agartha tradition does not ask us to accept it on faith alone. It offers evidence, or at least what its proponents consider evidence, in the form of specific predictions, specific observations, and specific parallels between the legend and the known facts of history and geography. One of the most compelling aspects of the Agartha legend is its geographical specificity. Unlike many myths and legends, which are set in vaguely defined or frankly imaginary landscapes, the Agartha tradition identifies specific real-world locations as entrances to the underground kingdom. And some of these locations have properties that are, at the very least, unusual and difficult to explain. The most frequently cited entrance to Agartha is in the Himalayas, and more specifically in the region of Tibet and the Kunlun Mountains. This is perhaps the most remote and least explored region on the face of the earth. The Tibetan Plateau, often called the roof of the world, is a vast expanse of high-altitude desert and grassland that covers an area larger than most European countries. It is surrounded on all sides by the highest mountain ranges on the planet, the Himalayas to the south, the Kunlun to the north, the Karakoram to the west, and the mountains of Sichuan and Yunnan to the east. Much of the interior of the plateau remains unmapped and unexplored even today. There are areas of the northern Tibetan Plateau where no human being has set foot in recorded history, vast, empty, windswept landscapes of rock and ice and sky, where temperatures can drop to 60 degrees below zero and the air is so thin that breathing is a constant struggle. It is in this forbidding landscape that the entrance to Shambhala, and by extension to Agartha, is most often located. The traditions speak of hidden valleys tucked between the mountains, invisible from the surrounding peaks where the climate is inexplicably mild, vegetation grows in abundance, and the air is warm and fragrant. These hidden valleys, known in Tibetan as Baal, are a well-established concept in Tibetan Buddhism. They are described as sacred spaces, blessed and concealed by the great Buddhist master Padmasambhava in the 8th century. According to tradition, Padmasambhava hid these valleys as refuges for future generations, to be discovered and opened only in times of great crisis on the surface world. The concept of Baal is not merely legendary. Several of these hidden valleys have actually been discovered in the Himalayas over the centuries. The most famous is the Pamako region of southeastern Tibet, a vast, jungle-covered gorge carved by the Tsangpo River as it plunges through the eastern Himalayas. Pamako was described in Tibetan texts for centuries as a Baal, a hidden sacred valley, before it was explored by Westerners in the early 20th century. When explorers finally reached the interior of Pamako, they found a landscape of astonishing beauty and biodiversity, a tropical paradise hidden in the heart of the world's highest mountains, with species of plants and animals found nowhere else on Earth. The discovery of Pamako and other Baal has led some researchers to speculate that the legend of Shambhala may be based on a real place, a hidden valley of extraordinary natural beauty and unusual climatic conditions, concealed by the towering mountains of the Himalayan range. But others have suggested that the Baal are merely the outer chambers of a much deeper system, that the hidden valleys are the surface expressions of underground passages that lead further and further into the interior of the earth, ultimately connecting to the vast underground kingdom of Agartha. Another frequently cited entrance to Agartha is located in the Gobi Desert. The Gobi is one of the largest and most inhospitable deserts on Earth, stretching across southern Mongolia and northern China. It is a place of extreme temperatures, violent sandstorms, and almost total desolation. And yet the Gobi has a rich and mysterious history. It is said that the Gobi was once the bed of a great inland sea, and that before the sea dried up, its shores were home to a flourishing civilization. Some traditions identify this civilization as the original homeland of the human race, a paradise of green meadows and clear lakes that was transformed into a barren desert by some ancient catastrophe. Beneath the sands of the Gobi, according to the Agartha legend, lie the ruins of this ancient civilization, and beneath those ruins lie the tunnels and passages that lead down to the underground kingdom. The Mongolian and Tibetan lamas who spoke to Ossendowski and Roerich specifically identified the Gobi as one of the primary entrances to Agartha. They said that in certain places in the desert, at certain times of the year, the entrance becomes visible, a dark opening in the sand or rock, leading downward into the depths of the earth. But the entrance is guarded, both by natural obstacles and by the forces of Agartha itself, and only those who are invited are able to pass through. The Andes Mountains of South America provide another set of alleged entrances to the underground world. The indigenous peoples of Peru and Bolivia have their own rich tradition of underground kingdoms. The Incas spoke of a place they called Paititi, a lost city of gold hidden in the jungle-covered mountains east of the Andes. But the legend of Paititi is not simply a story about a city on the surface. Some versions of the legend describe Paititi as an underground city, accessible through caves and tunnels in the Andean mountains. The Quechua and Aymara peoples have long told stories of a network of underground passages that connect the major Inca sites, Cusco, Machu Picchu, Sacsayhuaman, and others, and that extend deep into the earth, leading to hidden chambers filled with gold, sacred artifacts, and knowledge that has been kept secret for centuries. In the 1970s, a series of expeditions into the cave systems of the Andes yielded some remarkable discoveries. Explorers found tunnels that extended much further underground than expected, with walls that appeared to be unnaturally smooth, as if they had been cut or melted rather than formed by natural geological processes. Some of these tunnels were blocked by cave-ins or by underground rivers, making further exploration impossible. But the portions that were accessible were enough to convince some researchers that the tunnel systems of the Andes were far more extensive and far more complex than mainstream geology would predict. Similar stories of underground tunnels and hidden entrances are associated with locations around the world. Mount Shasta in the western mountains of the continent, which we will set aside. The Busegi Mountains of Romania, where a team of scientists allegedly discovered a vast underground chamber in 2003, filled with what appeared to be advanced technology of unknown origin. The mountains of Kurdistan, near the ancient site of Gobekli Tepe, the world's oldest known temple complex, which dates back more than 11,000 years and whose purpose and builders remain shrouded in mystery. The volcanic island of Easter Island in the Pacific, famous for its enigmatic stone statues and its legends of underground passages that connect the island to other hidden realms. Each of these locations has its own legends, its own stories of underground passages and hidden chambers, its own traditions of advanced beings living beneath the surface of the earth. And the remarkable thing is how similar these stories are, despite the vast distances that separate the cultures that tell them. The same elements appear again and again: underground tunnels of extraordinary length and complexity, hidden chambers filled with advanced technology or sacred knowledge, a source of light within the earth, an inner sun or luminous crystal or glowing atmosphere, and a civilization of beings who are wiser, more advanced, and more spiritually developed than the people of the surface. The universality of these legends is one of the strongest arguments in favor of the Agartha hypothesis. If the idea of an underground kingdom were the invention of a single culture or a single individual, we would expect it to be confined to one region and one period of history. But instead, we find it everywhere in the oldest texts of India and Sumeria, in the oral traditions of indigenous peoples on every continent, in the writings of ancient Greek philosophers and medieval Islamic scholars, in the accounts of modern explorers and scientists. The sheer breadth and consistency of the tradition suggests that it is rooted in something more than fantasy, that somewhere at some point in the deep past, there was a real experience, a real observation, or a real knowledge that gave rise to this persistent and universal belief. Let us now turn to one of the most controversial and most fascinating chapters in the history of the Agartha legend, the connection between the underground kingdom and the activities of certain governments and military organizations in the 20th century. It is a matter of historical record that several major governments have taken a serious interest in the legends of Shambhala and Agartha. The most well-documented case is that of the Third Reich, which devoted significant resources to the search for the underground kingdom during the 1930s and 40s. The Nazi interest in Agartha and Shambhala is not a modern conspiracy theory. It is well documented in historical records, academic research, and declassified government files. The roots of this interest lie in the esoteric and occult movements that flourished in Germany and Austria in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Organizations like the Thule Society and the Vril Society, which played a significant role in the early development of the Nazi movement, were deeply interested in Eastern mysticism, ancient civilizations, and the idea of a master race descended from a lost civilization. The Thule Society, founded in Munich in 1918, took its name from Thule, the mythical northern homeland of the Aryan race described in ancient Greek and Roman texts. The Society's members believed that the Aryans were the descendants of an ancient race of godlike beings who had originated in a northern paradise and had gradually spread across the world, founding the great civilizations of antiquity. Some members of the Thule Society believed that this ancient Aryan homeland was connected to the underground kingdom of Agartha, and that the descendants of the original Aryans still lived in the hidden caverns beneath the earth, preserving the pure bloodline and the advanced knowledge of their ancestors. The Vril Society, a related organization, was inspired by a novel written by the English author Edward Bulwer Lytton in 1871. The novel, titled The Coming Race, described a subterranean civilization of beings called the Vrilya, who had mastered a form of energy called Vril, a force of almost unlimited power that could be used for healing, for destruction, for communication, and for the animation of machines. Bulwer Lytton intended his novel as a work of fiction, but members of the Vril Society believed that it was based on fact, that Bulwer Lytton had somehow tapped into genuine knowledge about the inhabitants of the underground world and had disguised it as fiction. When the Nazi Party came to power in Germany in 1933, several key figures in the new government had connections to the Thule Society, the Vril Society, or both. Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, was particularly interested in the occult and in the idea of ancient Aryan civilizations. Under Himmler's direction, the SS established an organization called the Ahnenerbe, the Ancestral Heritage Research and Teaching Society, which was tasked with conducting research into the history, culture, and achievements of the Aryan race. The Ahnenerbe sponsored expeditions to various parts of the world, including Tibet, Scandinavia, the Middle East, and South America, searching for evidence of ancient Aryan civilizations and, according to some accounts, for the entrances to the underground kingdom. The most famous of these expeditions was the German expedition to Tibet in 1938 and 39, led by the zoologist Ernst Schäfer. The official purpose of the expedition was scientific, to study the geography, biology, and ethnography of Tibet. But there has been persistent speculation that the expedition had a secondary, secret purpose, to make contact with the inhabitants of Shambhala and to find the entrance to the underground kingdom. Schäfer's expedition spent several months in Tibet, visiting monasteries, interviewing lamas, and conducting scientific observations. The expedition collected a vast amount of data and specimens, including measurements of the skull dimensions of Tibetan people, a reflection of the Nazi obsession with racial classification. But whether the expedition found anything related to Shambhala or Agartha remains unclear. After the war, Schäfer maintained that the expedition was purely scientific and had nothing to do with the occult. But other accounts suggest that certain members of the expedition had specific instructions to gather information about the Shambhala legend and to identify possible locations of entrances to the underground kingdom. There are also persistent rumors, though these are much harder to verify, that the Nazis established secret bases in the Antarctic during the late 1930s and early 40s, and that these bases were connected to the Agartha legend. The idea is that the Nazis discovered an entrance to the underground kingdom in the Antarctic and established a base there, either to access the advanced technology of Agartha or to create a refuge for the Nazi leadership in the event of military defeat. This theory is supported, at least circumstantially, by a few intriguing historical facts. In 1938 and 39, Germany sent an expedition to Antarctica, the New Swabia expedition, which mapped a large area of the Antarctic coast and dropped thousands of metal swastika markers to claim the territory for Germany. The purpose of this expedition has never been fully explained. After the war in 1947, the United States Navy conducted a major military operation in Antarctica called Operation High Jump, led by Admiral Richard Byrd. The operation involved 13 ships, 23 aircraft, and more than 4,000 personnel. The official purpose of Operation Highjump was to establish a research base and to train personnel for cold weather operations. But the scale and military nature of the operation have led some researchers to speculate that its true purpose was to locate and destroy the rumored Nazi base, or perhaps to find the entrance to the underground kingdom that the Nazis had allegedly discovered. Admiral Byrd himself has become a central figure in the Agartha legend, largely because of a remarkable diary entry that he allegedly wrote during a flight over the North Pole in February of 1947. According to this diary, which many researchers consider to be a fabrication, Byrd described flying into a strange, warm region near the pole, where the ice and snow gave way to green valleys, flowing rivers, and mountains covered in forests. He described encountering large, unknown animals in this landscape and being greeted by tall, blonde beings in a gleaming city. These beings allegedly told Byrd that he had entered the interior of the earth and that they were the inhabitants of Agartha. They warned him about the dangers of nuclear weapons and urged him to carry their message of peace back to the surface world. The authenticity of this diary has been hotly debated for decades. Byrd's family and the United States Navy have never confirmed its existence, and many researchers believe it to be a hoax created by individuals seeking to promote the Hollow Earth theory. But the story has become deeply embedded in the Agartha legend, and it continues to be cited by proponents of the theory as evidence that at least one person from the surface world has made contact with the inhabitants of the underground kingdom. Whether or not Byrd's diary is genuine, his career provides some interesting details that feed into the legend. Byrd conducted multiple expeditions to both the Arctic and the Antarctic, and he was known to have made statements about the strategic importance of the polar regions that seemed to go beyond what was warranted by the known geography of those areas. In a widely reported interview, Byrd stated that the most important result of his Antarctic expeditions was the discovery that the Antarctic continent was much larger than previously thought, and that it contained resources of incalculable value. He also made cryptic references to new lands beyond the pole that he had observed during his flights, a phrase that has been interpreted by Agartha enthusiasts as a reference to the lands of the inner earth, visible through the polar opening. The Agartha legend also intersects with another major mystery of the 20th century, the phenomenon of unidentified flying objects. We have already mentioned Nicholas Roerich's observation of a golden, luminous object in the skies of Central Asia in the 1920s, and the explanation offered by his Mongolian guides that it was a vehicle from Shambhala. But the connection between the underground kingdom and unidentified aerial phenomena goes much deeper than this single incident. Throughout the 20th century, there have been numerous reports of unidentified objects emerging from the earth rather than descending from the sky. Witnesses have described luminous objects rising out of the ocean, emerging from mountain caves, or appearing out of the ground itself before ascending rapidly into the atmosphere. These reports come from all over the world and from witnesses of all backgrounds, including military pilots, commercial airline crews, and trained scientific observers. In the early 1950s, a researcher named Ray Palmer, the editor of a popular magazine devoted to unexplained phenomena, proposed that many of the unidentified objects being reported around the world were not coming from outer space but from inside the Earth. Palmer argued that the objects were vehicles belonging to the inhabitants of the underground kingdom, and that they were using the tunnel system of Agartha to travel rapidly from one part of the world to another, emerging briefly on the surface before returning to their subterranean realm. Palmer's theory was influenced by a series of letters he had received from a man named Richard Shaver, who claimed to have personal experience of the underground world. Shaver described a vast system of underground caverns populated by two races, the Darrow's detrimental robots, who were degenerate remnants of an ancient civilization and who used advanced technology to torment and manipulate surface dwellers, and the Tieros integrative robots, who were the benevolent descendants of the same ancient civilization and who worked to protect surface humanity from the depredations of the Deros. Shaver's accounts were published as fiction in the magazine Amazing Stories in the 1940s, but both Shaver and Palmer maintained that they were based on fact. The Shaver mystery, as it came to be known, generated an enormous response from the public. Thousands of readers wrote in to share their own experiences of underground encounters, strange sounds coming from beneath the earth, mysterious disappearances in cave systems, and encounters with unusual beings in remote locations. While many of these accounts were clearly fictional or delusional, the sheer volume of the response suggested that there was a deep and widespread belief in the existence of an underground world, a belief that went far beyond the readership of a single magazine. The connection between underground kingdoms and unidentified aerial phenomena was further reinforced by reports from military and intelligence sources. During the Cold War, both the Western and Soviet military establishments maintained extensive monitoring networks designed to detect aircraft, missiles, and other airborne threats. These networks occasionally detected objects that could not be identified as known aircraft or natural phenomena. In some cases, the objects appeared to originate from locations on or below the surface of the Earth rather than from the atmosphere or outer space. One of the most intriguing reports came from the Soviet Union in the 1960s and 70s. Soviet scientists conducting deep drilling operations in the Kola Peninsula reported hearing strange sounds coming from deep within the earth, sounds that they described as resembling human screams or cries. The Soviet drilling project eventually reached a depth of more than 12 kilometers, the deepest hole ever drilled into the earth, and the scientists reported encountering unexpected conditions at extreme depths, including temperatures that were much higher than predicted and rock formations that were much less dense than expected. While the reports of strange sounds have been dismissed by most scientists as urban legends or misinterpretations of natural phenomena, they have become part of the broader mythology of the underground world. The Agartha legend also has a profound spiritual and philosophical dimension that should not be overlooked. For many of those who believe in the underground kingdom, Agartha is not merely a physical place, it is a symbol of the highest aspirations of the human spirit. It represents the idea that somewhere, somehow, a civilization has achieved what surface humanity has always dreamed of but never accomplished. A society without war, without poverty, without disease, without ignorance, without the 1,000 forms of suffering that have plagued our species since the dawn of history. In this interpretation, the search for Agartha is not merely a geographical quest, but a spiritual one. The entrance to the underground kingdom is not merely a hole in the ground, but a gateway to a higher state of consciousness. The journey to Agartha is not merely a physical journey through deserts and mountains, but an inner journey through the landscapes of the soul. And the king of the world is not merely a political ruler, but the embodiment of the divine wisdom that lies at the center of every human being, waiting to be discovered. This spiritual interpretation is deeply rooted in the Buddhist and Hindu traditions that gave rise to the Shambhala legend. In Tibetan Buddhism, the journey to Shambhala is often described as a metaphor for the path to enlightenment. The mountains and deserts that the traveler must cross represent the obstacles and challenges of the spiritual path. The guardians that protect the entrance represent the inner demons, fear, doubt, anger, attachment, that must be overcome before the seeker can attain the ultimate goal. And Shambhala itself represents the state of perfect wisdom and perfect compassion that is the birthright of every sentient being. But here is the remarkable thing. Even those who interpret Shambhala in purely spiritual terms do not necessarily deny its physical existence. In Tibetan Buddhism, the boundary between the physical and the spiritual is not as sharp as it is in Western thought. A place can be both a physical location and a state of consciousness simultaneously. A journey can be both an outer expedition and an inner quest at the same time. The idea that something must be either real or symbolic, that it cannot be both, is a product of Western dualistic thinking that does not apply in the Eastern traditions from which the Shambhala legend emerged. This is perhaps the most important point to understand about the Agartha legend. It is not simply a story about a hidden city underground. It is a story about the nature of reality itself, about the possibility that reality is far more complex, far more layered, and far more mysterious than our ordinary experience suggests. It is a story about the possibility that there are dimensions of existence that we cannot perceive with our ordinary senses, places that exist in the spaces between the physical and the spiritual, beings that inhabit realms that overlap with our own but that remain invisible to us because we have not developed the capacity to see them. This idea is not as far-fetched as it might sound. Modern physics has already demonstrated that the reality we perceive with our senses is only a tiny fraction of the reality that actually exists. We know that the electromagnetic spectrum extends far beyond the narrow band of visible light that our eyes can detect. We know that our ears can hear only a small range of the sound frequencies that actually exist. We know that there are forms of matter, dark matter, and forms of energy, dark energy, that together make up more than 95% of the total mass energy of the universe, and yet they are completely invisible to all of our instruments and all of our senses. If 95% of the universe is invisible to us, is it really so impossible that there might be a kingdom inside the earth that is also invisible? Is it really so absurd to suggest that there might be a civilization that exists in a dimension or a frequency that our senses cannot detect? Is it really so unreasonable to entertain the possibility that the ancient traditions were right, that there is more to reality than meets the eye, and that the world we see is only the surface of a much deeper and much more extraordinary truth? These are the questions that the Agartha legend forces us to confront. And in the second part of this documentary, we will go even deeper. We will examine the specific cave systems and underground structures around the world that have been identified as possible entrances to Agartha. We will look at the testimonies of individuals who claim to have actually visited the underground kingdom. We will explore the connections between the Agartha legend and modern scientific discoveries about the interior of the earth. We will investigate the role that secret societies and intelligence agencies have played in the search for the underground kingdom. And we will confront the ultimate question, is Agartha real? But for now, let us sit with what we have learned so far. Let us sit with the fact that every major civilization in human history has told stories about a world beneath the world. Let us sit with the fact that these stories are remarkably consistent, despite being separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles. Let us sit with the fact that serious scientists, respected explorers, and powerful governments have all taken the Agartha legend seriously enough to devote significant resources to investigating it. And let us sit with the most unsettling question of all: what if they found something? The tunnels of the world are among the most mysterious and least understood features of our planet's geography. We tend to think of the surface of the Earth as a solid, continuous shell of rock and soil, but the reality is far more complex. The crust of the Earth is riddled with cavities, caverns, tunnels, and passages of every conceivable size and shape. Some of these have been explored and mapped, most have not, and the deeper we go, the less we know. The longest known cave system in the world is the Mammoth Cave System, which extends for more than 400 miles beneath the surface. But this is only the portion that has been explored and mapped. Geologists estimate that the actual extent of the system is much greater, perhaps thousands of miles of passages that have never been seen by human eyes. And the Mammoth Cave is just one of thousands of major cave systems that have been identified around the world. The Krubera Cave in the western Caucasus extends more than 2,000 meters below the surface, the deepest cave ever explored. The Sun Dune Cave in Southeast Asia contains chambers so large that a 40-story building could fit inside them. The Lechagia Cave System contains passages of such extraordinary beauty decorated with crystals, formations, and mineral deposits of unimaginable variety, that scientists who explore it describe the experience as otherworldly. And these are only the caves that we know about. Seismic studies and ground-penetrating radar surveys have revealed the existence of vast underground chambers and passages that have never been directly explored. In some cases, these chambers are so large and so deep that our current technology cannot reach them. They exist in the darkness, unknown and unknowable, beneath our feet. For the proponents of the Agartha legend, these discoveries are not merely interesting geological findings. They are evidence that the Earth's interior is far more complex and far more spacious than mainstream science acknowledges. If there are caves hundreds of miles long and chambers the size of cities just a few miles below the surface, they argue what might exist at greater depths. What caverns, what passages, what vast underground spaces might be waiting in the darkness, 10 miles down, or 50 miles down, or 100 miles down. The deepest that human beings have ever penetrated into the Earth is approximately 12 kilometers, the depth reached by the Kola superdeep borehole in Russia. 12 kilometers is less than 1/5 of 1% of the distance from the surface of the Earth to its center. In other words, despite all of our technology and all of our scientific achievements, we have barely scratched the surface, literally, of the planet we call home. The vast majority of the Earth's interior remains completely unknown to us, and it is in this vast unknown that the legend of Agartha takes root. The traditions of indigenous peoples around the world provide a rich and largely untapped source of information about the underground world. In almost every culture that has been studied by anthropologists and ethnographers, there are stories of beings who live beneath the earth, of tunnels and passages that lead to hidden realms, and of a time when the underground beings and the surface dwellers lived together in harmony. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia, whose cultural traditions extend back more than 60,000 years, have a rich mythology of underground beings and subterranean worlds. In the dream time, the Aboriginal concept of the mythological past that shapes the present, there are stories of ancestral beings who emerged from the ground, shaped the landscape, and then returned to the underground world. Some Aboriginal traditions describe vast underground networks of tunnels and chambers where these ancestral beings still live, watching over the surface world and maintaining the sacred balance between the human and natural realms. The indigenous peoples of the Pacific Islands also have traditions of underground kingdoms. In Hawaii, the volcano goddess Pele is said to dwell in a vast underground realm beneath the volcanic mountains, a realm of fire and light and immense creative power. In Polynesian mythology, the underworld known as Pulatu or Po is not merely a realm of the dead, but a place of continuing life, activity, and creative energy. The ancestors who dwell there are not ghosts or spirits in the Western sense, but fully alive beings who simply inhabit a different level of reality. In Africa, the Zulu tradition speaks of underground cities inhabited by advanced beings called the Chitori, who are said to possess extraordinary knowledge and technology. The Dogon people of Mali, famous for their astronomical knowledge of the Sirius star system, also have traditions of underground beings who brought knowledge and civilization to the surface world. The Hopi people have a creation story that describes humanity emerging from underground worlds, climbing up through successive layers of subterranean reality before reaching the surface of the earth. The Celtic traditions of Europe are particularly rich in underground lore. The Tuatha De Danann, the mythological race of gods and heroes who ruled Ireland before the coming of the Gaels, are said to have retreated underground when they were defeated in battle, taking up residence in the Shia, the mounds and hills of the Irish landscape. In Celtic tradition, the Shia are not merely burial mounds or geological features. They are entrances to the otherworld, a parallel realm of extraordinary beauty and timelessness where the ancient gods and heroes continue to live. The otherworld is described as a place of perpetual youth, where there is no disease, no aging, and no death, a description that closely parallels the accounts of Agartha. The convergence of all these traditions from opposite sides of the world, from cultures that had no contact with one another, spanning tens of thousands of years of human history, is one of the most striking aspects of the Agartha phenomenon. How do we explain the fact that the Aboriginal Australians, the Tibetan Buddhists, the ancient Hindus, the Celtic Druids, the Hopi elders, and the Zulu storytellers all tell essentially the same story about a hidden world beneath the earth? How do we explain the fact that this story appears in every age and every culture, with the same basic elements: underground passages, hidden chambers, advanced beings, and a mysterious source of inner light? There are several possible explanations. The simplest is coincidence, that these stories are the independent products of different imaginations working on a common theme. The underground world is a natural source of mystery and speculation for any culture that lives on the surface of the earth. Caves are dark, mysterious places. It is natural to wonder what lies beyond the furthest reaches of any cave, beyond the point where the light gives out and the darkness becomes absolute. Perhaps the Agartha legend is simply the universal human response to this universal mystery. Another explanation is psychological. The psychologist Carl Jung argued that certain images and ideas are hardwired into the human psyche, part of what he called the collective unconscious. According to Jung, the image of the underground world is an archetype, a universal symbol that appears in the dreams, myths, and fantasies of all human beings, regardless of their culture or background. The underground world represents the unconscious mind itself, the vast, hidden realm of instinct, memory, and emotion that lies beneath the surface of conscious awareness. In this interpretation, the Agartha legend is not about a real place, but about the inner depths of the human soul. But there is a third explanation, one that the proponents of the Agartha legend would immediately endorse. Perhaps the stories are consistent because they are true. Perhaps there really is an underground kingdom. Perhaps it really has been visited by individuals from every culture and every era. And perhaps the stories that have been told about it for thousands of years are not myths or fantasies or psychological projections, but genuine accounts of a real place, transmitted through oral tradition and sacred text from generation to generation, culture to culture, millennium to millennium. This is the explanation that we cannot prove, but it is also the explanation that we cannot disprove. And as long as it remains possible, as long as the interior of the earth remains the vast, unexplored mystery that it is, the legend of Agartha will continue to captivate the human imagination. There is one more dimension of the Agartha legend that must be addressed before we conclude the first part of this documentary, and it is perhaps the most provocative dimension of all. It is the claim that the inhabitants of Agartha are not merely passive observers of the surface world but active participants in its history. According to the tradition, the Agarthans have intervened in surface affairs at critical moments throughout history. They have sent emissaries, teachers, and prophets to the surface world to guide humanity through periods of crisis and transformation. Some versions of the legend go so far as to claim that many of the great religious and philosophical leaders of human history, the Buddha, Jesus, Lao Tzu, Zoroaster, and others, were either inhabitants of Agartha who traveled to the surface to deliver their teachings, or were surface dwellers who received their wisdom from Agarthan sources during visits to the underground kingdom. This is obviously a claim of staggering magnitude. If it were true, it would mean that the major religions and philosophies of the world are not the independent creations of human genius, but are instead the products of a single, hidden source, a source that has been deliberately and systematically shaping human consciousness for thousands of years. It would mean that the diversity of human culture is, at its deepest level, an illusion, and that beneath the surface differences of language, ritual, and belief, there is a single, unified wisdom tradition that originated in the underground kingdom and was disseminated to the surface world through carefully chosen agents and intermediaries. This idea, the idea of a perennial philosophy, a single wisdom tradition underlying all the world's religions, is not unique to the Agartha legend. It has been proposed by various thinkers throughout history, from the ancient Neoplatonists to the modern Theosophists. but the Agartha legend gives this idea a specific geographical location and a specific institutional structure. The perennial philosophy is not merely an abstract idea floating in the ether. It is the product of a specific civilization, living in a specific place, and it is maintained and transmitted by specific individuals who have dedicated themselves to the task of guiding humanity's spiritual evolution. Whether or not one accepts this claim, it raises a question that is worth pondering. Why does the human species seem to have such a universal and persistent intuition that there is a hidden wisdom, a secret knowledge, a concealed truth that lies just beyond the reach of ordinary perception? Why do so many cultures in so many ages tell stories about hidden masters, secret teachers, and concealed kingdoms where the ultimate truth is preserved? Is this merely the product of wishful thinking, the understandable human desire to believe that somewhere, someone has figured it all out, or does it reflect a genuine intuition, a dim but persistent awareness of something real, something that exists just beyond the boundaries of our perception, waiting to be discovered? These are the questions that will guide us into the second part of this documentary. We have laid the foundation. We have explored the ancient legends, the modern accounts, the scientific questions, and the spiritual implications of the Agartha story. Now we must go deeper into the specific evidence, the specific testimonies, and the specific mysteries that make the Agartha legend one of the most compelling and enduring enigmas in all of human history. The entrance is ahead of us. The tunnel stretches downward into the darkness, and the only question that remains is whether we have the courage to follow it. Before we proceed to the second part, let us take a moment to reflect on what makes the Agartha legend so uniquely powerful and so persistently fascinating. It is not merely the idea of a hidden kingdom. Human cultures have always told stories about hidden places: Shangri-La, El Dorado, the Garden of Eden, the land of Chinkana. What makes the Agartha legend different is its specificity, its universality, and its connection to some of the deepest questions in science, philosophy, and spirituality. The Agartha legend asks us to reconsider everything we think we know about the planet we live on. It asks us to question whether the surface of the earth, the thin, fragile crust of rock and soil that we call home, is really all there is. It asks us to wonder whether the vast interior of our planet might harbor secrets that we have not yet discovered. It asks us to consider the possibility that our civilization, for all its achievements, might not be the most advanced civilization on this planet, that somewhere in the hidden spaces beneath our feet, there might exist a society that has surpassed us in every way that matters. And it asks us the most profound question of all: what would it mean for humanity if such a place were real? What would it mean for our understanding of history, of religion, of science, of ourselves? What would change and what would remain the same? These are not idle questions. They are questions that have been asked by seekers, scholars, explorers, and dreamers for thousands of years. They are questions that will continue to be asked for thousands of years more. And they are the questions that will guide us as we continue this journey in the second part of this documentary. The legend of Agartha is calling, the entrance is waiting, and the darkness below is not empty, it is full of light. If you have not yet seen part 1 of this documentary, we strongly encourage you to watch it first, as everything we are about to discuss builds upon the foundation that was laid in that first chapter. Please let us know in the comments where you are watching this video and what time you are watching it, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for future videos. In part 1, we trace the legend of Agartha from its deepest roots in the ancient civilizations of Sumeria, Egypt, India, and Greece, through the Buddhist traditions of Tibet and the esoteric teachings of Central Asia, to the accounts of 19th and 20th century explorers who encountered the legend firsthand in the deserts and mountains of Mongolia and Tibet. We examine the hollow earth theory and its surprising connections to mainstream science. We explored the Nazi obsession with Shambhala and the controversial diary of Admiral Byrd, and we posed the question that will guide us through this second and final part of the documentary: is Agartha real? Now we go deeper. We descend into the tunnels. We follow the passages that have been described by witnesses, seekers, and scholars across the centuries. We examine the physical evidence, the caves, the structures, the anomalies that proponents of the Agartha legend cite as proof that the underground kingdom exists. We listen to the testimonies of those who claim to have been there, and we confront the full implications of what it would mean if the oldest and most universal legend in human history turned out to be true. The descent begins now. Let us start with the tunnels. If Agartha exists, it must be connected to the surface of the earth by a network of passages, tunnels, caves, shafts, and corridors that link the underground kingdom to the world above. And if such a network exists, there should be physical evidence of it: entrances, openings, geological anomalies, or underground structures that cannot be explained by conventional geology. As it turns out, there is a remarkable amount of such evidence scattered across every continent, documented by explorers, scientists, and indigenous peoples over centuries, and stubbornly resistant to conventional explanation. We begin in South America, where the legends of underground tunnels are among the most detailed and the most persistent in the world. The Andes Mountains, stretching like a spine down the western edge of the South American continent, are home to some of the most extensive and least understood underground structures on the planet. The indigenous peoples of Peru and Bolivia, the Quechua, the Aymara, and before them the Inca, have long spoken of a vast network of tunnels that crisscrosses the continent beneath the Andes. These tunnels are known by various names in different local traditions, but the most common term is Chinkana, a Quechua word that means place where one gets lost. The Chinkana are not merely mythological. Several entrances to the tunnel system have been identified, explored to varying degrees, and then sealed off by authorities who deem them too dangerous for further exploration. The most famous of these entrances is located near the ancient Inca capital of Cusco, beneath the fortress of Sacsayhuaman. Sacsayhuaman is itself one of the great engineering mysteries of the ancient world, a massive stone structure built from blocks weighing up to 200 tons each, fitted together with such precision that a knife blade cannot be inserted between them. The construction methods used to build Sacsayhuaman have never been satisfactorily explained by mainstream archaeology. Beneath Sacsayhuaman, there are known tunnel entrances that lead downward into the rock. Local tradition holds that these tunnels extend for hundreds of miles, connecting Cusco to other major Inca sites, including the legendary city of Paititi, the lost city of gold that is said to be the final refuge of the Inca priests who fled from the Spanish conquistadors in the 16th century, carrying with them the sacred treasures of the Inca Empire. In the 1920s, a team of explorers entered one of the Chinkana tunnels near Cusco and did not return. A search party followed their route into the tunnel and found that the passage extended much further than expected, descending steeply into the earth and branching into multiple corridors that seemed to go on indefinitely. The search party turned back before reaching the end of any of these passages, and the Peruvian authorities subsequently sealed the entrance to the tunnel with a heavy stone block, declaring it too dangerous for further exploration. The fate of the original explorers was never determined. This incident is far from unique. Throughout the Andes, there are accounts of explorers, treasure hunters, and curious locals entering tunnel systems, and either not returning or returning with stories of passages that extended far deeper and far further than any natural cave formation should. In the 1970s, the explorer and writer Erich von Däniken brought worldwide attention to a tunnel system in Ecuador, allegedly discovered by a man named János Roerich, a Hungarian-Argentine entrepreneur and amateur archaeologist. Roerich claimed to have found a vast network of artificial tunnels beneath the Ecuadorian province of Morona Santiago, containing chambers filled with metallic plaques inscribed with an unknown writing system, statues made of unknown materials, and other artifacts that he believed were evidence of an ancient, advanced civilization. Von Däniken visited the site and wrote about it in his book, The Gold of the Gods, published in 1973. His account described tunnels with smooth, perfectly straight walls that appeared to have been cut through the rock with some kind of advanced technology rather than carved by hand or formed by natural processes. He described chambers of enormous size, illuminated by an unknown source of light and filled with artifacts that defied explanation. The veracity of von Däniken's account has been questioned, and Moritz himself later gave contradictory accounts of the discovery, but the tunnels themselves are real. They have been explored by multiple expeditions, including a major expedition organized by the British Ecuadorian scientific community in the 1970s, which confirmed the existence of extensive underground passages in the region. The full extent of the tunnel system has never been determined because the passages extend far beyond the reach of current exploration technology, disappearing into the darkness at depths that no expedition has been able to reach. The South American tunnel legends are particularly significant because they are not confined to a single location or a single culture. Similar stories of underground passages are found throughout the continent, in Colombia, in Brazil, in Argentina, in Chile, and in Venezuela. The indigenous peoples of the Amazon basin have their own traditions of underground beings and subterranean worlds, distinct from the Andean traditions but containing many of the same elements: hidden entrances in remote locations, passages that extend far underground, and advanced beings who inhabit the depths. The Macuxi people of northern Brazil and southern Venezuela have a particularly detailed tradition of the underground world. According to Macuxi legend, their ancestors discovered a cave entrance that led deep into the earth. After traveling for many days through the darkness, they emerged into a vast underground world illuminated by a great light, a light that was not the sun but that provided warmth and illumination comparable to the sun. In this underground world, they encountered a civilization of tall, healthy people who lived in beautiful cities and who possessed knowledge far beyond anything known on the surface. The Macuxi ancestors lived with these underground people for a time before returning to the surface, and they passed the story of their journey down through the generations. The parallels between the Macuxi legend and the Agartha tradition are striking: an entrance hidden in a remote location, a long journey through darkness, an underground world illuminated by an inner sun, a civilization of advanced beings. These are the same elements that appear in the Tibetan, Mongolian, Indian, and Central Asian traditions, on the opposite side of the planet, in a culture that had no contact with those traditions. How do we explain this convergence, coincidence, universal archetype, or the possibility that these independent cultures are all describing the same real phenomenon? Let us cross the world now and examine the tunnel legends of Europe and the Middle East. Turkey, the ancient land of Anatolia, is home to some of the most extraordinary underground structures ever discovered. The most famous is Derinkuyu, an underground city in the Cappadocia region of central Turkey that extends at least 18 stories below the surface, and that could accommodate approximately 20,000 people, along with their livestock and food supplies. Derinkuyu was carved from the soft volcanic rock of the Cappadocian Plateau, and it includes living quarters, kitchens, storage rooms, churches, schools, wine and oil presses, and an intricate ventilation system that brought fresh air from the surface to the deepest levels. Derinkuyu was not alone. More than 200 underground cities have been identified in the Cappadocia region, and many of them are connected by tunnels that extend for miles between the cities. The full extent of this underground network has never been determined. Some tunnels have been explored for several kilometers before becoming too narrow or too unstable for further exploration. Others are blocked by rubble or by underground water, but the portions that have been explored reveal a level of engineering sophistication that is remarkable for any era, and that raises profound questions about who built these cities, when they were built, and why. The conventional archaeological explanation is that the underground cities of Cappadocia were built by early Christians seeking refuge from religious persecution, and that they were used intermittently from the Byzantine period through the Ottoman era. But this explanation has been challenged by several researchers who point out that the sheer scale and complexity of the underground cities, and the fact that there are more than 200 of them in a single region, suggest a much earlier origin. Some researchers have argued that the underground cities date back thousands of years before the Christian era, and that they were built by a civilization whose identity and purpose have been lost to history. The deepest levels of Derinkuyu have never been fully explored. There are passages that descend beyond the 18th story into regions that are too unstable or too dangerous for current exploration technology. Local legends hold that these deeper passages connect to a much larger underground network, a system of tunnels that extends far beyond the Cappadocian Plateau, and that links the underground cities of Turkey to other underground structures in other parts of the world. This claim might sound outlandish, but it gains a measure of credibility when we consider that similar underground structures exist in many other parts of the Middle East and Central Asia. In Iran, there are underground cities that rival those of Cappadocia in size and complexity. The city of Naushabad in central Iran is an underground complex that extends 3 stories below the surface, and that was used for centuries as a refuge from invaders. Like Derinkuyu, Naushabad has ventilation shafts, water channels, and an intricate layout designed to confuse intruders who attempted to enter the underground complex. In the mountains of Kurdistan, the border region between Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Syria, there are legends of underground passages that are thousands of years old and that were created by a civilization that predated the Sumerians. These legends are associated with some of the oldest and most mysterious archaeological sites in the world, including Gobekli Tepe. Gobekli Tepe is a site that has fundamentally challenged our understanding of the origins of civilization. Located in southeastern Turkey, it is a complex of massive stone circles, carved pillars, and elaborate reliefs that dates back more than 11,000 years, at least 6,000 years older than Stonehenge and more than 5,000 years older than the earliest known civilization in Mesopotamia. The pillars of Gobekli Tepe are carved with images of animals, abstract symbols, and humanoid figures that have no parallels in any other known culture. The purpose of Gobekli Tepe remains a mystery. It does not appear to have been a settlement. There are no houses, no streets, no evidence of domestic life. Some archaeologists believe it was a temple complex built by hunter-gatherers for purposes that we can only guess at, but others have suggested that it may have served a different function entirely, that it may have been built as a marker or a guardian for something beneath the surface. This suggestion is based on several observations. First, the site was deliberately buried. At some point in its history, thousands of years after it was built, Gobekli Tepe was intentionally covered with earth and stone, as if someone wanted to conceal it. This is extremely unusual. Ancient peoples did not typically bury their monuments. The fact that Gobekli Tepe was deliberately hidden suggests that someone had a specific reason for wanting to keep it out of sight. Second, ground-penetrating radar surveys of the area around Gobekli Tepe have revealed the existence of underground structures that have not yet been excavated. These structures appear to extend much deeper than the surface monuments, and their full extent is unknown. Some researchers have speculated that the surface structures of Gobekli Tepe are merely the entrance or the antechamber of a much larger underground complex, and that this underground complex may be connected to the ancient tunnel network that is described in the legends of the region. This is, of course, speculation. But it is speculation that is supported by the physical evidence of underground structures, by the anomalous age and purpose of the surface site, and by the persistent local legends of tunnels and underground worlds that have been told in this region for thousands of years. Moving further east, we enter the heartland of the Agartha legend, the mountains and deserts of Central Asia. The Gobi Desert, as we discussed in Part 1, is one of the most frequently cited locations for an entrance to Agartha. But the Gobi is also one of the most mysterious landscapes on Earth, and it has yielded a number of discoveries that have puzzled scientists and researchers for decades. One of the most intriguing is the phenomenon known as the singing sands of the Gobi. In certain areas of the desert, the sand dunes produce a deep, resonant humming or booming sound that can be heard for miles. This phenomenon has been observed and documented by travelers, scientists, and military personnel. While the scientific explanation attributes the sound to the movement of sand grains under specific conditions of wind and temperature, the indigenous peoples of the region have a different explanation. They say that the singing sands mark the locations of underground chambers and passages beneath the desert, that the sound is produced by the resonance of air moving through these underground spaces, and that the louder the sound, the closer the chamber is to the surface. This explanation is not as far-fetched as it might seem. Acoustic resonance is a well-understood physical phenomenon, and it is entirely plausible that underground cavities could amplify and distort sounds produced on the surface. In fact, acoustic surveys are one of the standard tools used by geologists to detect underground voids and cavities. The singing sands of the Gobi may be, in effect, a natural acoustic survey, revealing the presence of underground structures through the sound they produce. The Altai Mountains, which straddle the borders of Russia, China, Mongolia, and Kazakhstan, are another region rich in underground legends. The Altai are among the oldest mountains on Earth, and they have been inhabited by human beings for at least 40,000 years. The indigenous peoples of the Altai, the Altaians, the Tuvans, and others, have a rich tradition of underground worlds and hidden kingdoms. They speak of a place called Belovedai, the land of white waters, a hidden paradise in the mountains where enlightened beings live in peace and harmony, far from the troubles of the surface world. Belovedai is described in terms that are almost identical to the descriptions of Shambhala in the Tibetan traditions, a hidden kingdom surrounded by mountains, invisible to ordinary perception, and accessible only to those who are spiritually prepared. Russian explorers and scientists who have worked in the Altai have reported discovering cave systems and underground passages that extend far deeper than expected. Some of these caves contain artifacts, tools, carvings, and other objects that suggest human use going back thousands of years. And in some cases, the passages extend so deep and so far that no expedition has been able to reach their end. One of the most remarkable reports from the Altai comes from a Russian geological survey conducted in the 1960s. The survey team was conducting routine seismic measurements in a remote area of the mountains when they detected an anomaly, a large, clearly defined void deep beneath the surface. The void was too regular in shape to be a natural cave formation, and it was located at a depth that was beyond the reach of any known natural process. The survey team reported their finding to the authorities, but no follow-up investigation was conducted, at least not officially. The fate of the report and the nature of the anomaly remain unknown. Tibet itself, of course, is the epicenter of the Shambhala legend, and it is here that some of the most extraordinary claims about underground entrances have been made. The Tibetan Plateau is one of the least explored regions on Earth. Despite the rapid modernization of China and the construction of roads, railways, and military installations across the plateau, there are still vast areas of northern and western Tibet that have never been surveyed in detail. The region known as the Changtang, the Northern Plain, is a high-altitude desert of approximately 600,000 square kilometers, much of it above 5,000 meters in elevation. It is one of the most inhospitable environments on the planet, bitterly cold, virtually devoid of vegetation, and so remote that some areas have never been visited by any human being in recorded history. It is in the Changtang that many traditions place the entrance to Shambhala. The Tibetan texts describe the entrance as being hidden among the mountains and frozen lakes of the northern plateau, concealed by natural barriers and by the spiritual forces that protect the kingdom from unwanted visitors. Some texts describe the entrance as a cave or tunnel in the side of a mountain. Others describe it as a valley, a bail hidden between towering peaks, invisible from the surrounding landscape. And still others describe it as existing in a state that is not entirely physical, a gateway that can only be perceived and accessed by those who have achieved the proper state of consciousness. Several expeditions have attempted to find the entrance to Shambhala in Tibet, with varying degrees of seriousness and varying results. In the early 20th century, the 13th Dalai Lama is reported to have told certain Western visitors that Shambhala was a real place that could be reached through physical travel, but that the journey was so dangerous and the conditions so extreme that it was virtually impossible for any ordinary person to survive it. He said that the entrance was located in an area so remote and so desolate that it was effectively beyond the reach of any expedition. In the 1920s and 30s, several expeditions set out to find Shambhala, motivated by a combination of spiritual seeking, political intrigue, and personal ambition. Nicholas Roerich's expedition, which we discussed in Part 1, was one of the most famous, but there were others, including expeditions sponsored by the Soviet government, which saw the Shambhala legend as a potentially useful tool for extending Soviet influence in Central Asia. The Soviet interest in Shambhala was driven by two considerations. First, the Soviet intelligence services recognized that the Shambhala legend had enormous power over the hearts and minds of the people of Central Asia, the Tibetans, the Mongols, the Buryats, and other Buddhist peoples who lived within or near the borders of the Soviet Union. If the Soviet government could claim to have found Shambhala or could co-opt the legend for its own purposes, it could strengthen its control over these populations. Second, there were individuals within the Soviet government who took the legend seriously, who believed that Shambhala might be a real place, and that the advanced knowledge it supposedly contained could give the Soviet Union a decisive advantage in its competition with the Western powers. The most remarkable of these Soviet expeditions was organized by a man named Alexander Barchenko, a scientist, mystic, and intelligence operative who had close ties to the Soviet secret police. In the 1920s, Barchenko organized an expedition to Central Asia to search for Shambhala with the backing of the Soviet intelligence services. The expedition's activities remained shrouded in secrecy. Barchenko was arrested during Stalin's purges in the late 1930s and was executed, and many of his papers and records were destroyed. But fragments of information that have survived suggest that Barchenko may have discovered something, some piece of evidence or some encounter, that convinced him that the Shambhala legend was based on fact. What that evidence was, we may never know. Barchenko took his secrets to the grave. But his story illustrates the remarkable fact that the Agartha and Shambhala legends were taken seriously enough by one of the most powerful governments on Earth to justify the expenditure of significant resources on their investigation. Let us turn now to the testimonies of individuals who claim to have actually visited the underground kingdom. Throughout history, there have been people who have claimed to have traveled to Agartha, Shambhala, or some other version of the underground world. These claims range from the clearly fictional to the deeply ambiguous, and they come from individuals of every background: monks, soldiers, explorers, scientists, and ordinary people who stumbled upon something extraordinary in the most unexpected circumstances. One of the most detailed and most controversial accounts of a visit to the underground world comes from a Norwegian sailor named Olaf Jansen. According to a book published in 1908 by Willis George Emerson, titled The Smoky God, or A Voyage to the Inner World, Jansen and his father sailed beyond the North Pole in 1829 and found themselves in a vast, warm ocean illuminated by a dim, reddish sun that hung in the center of the sky. They described a landscape of lush vegetation, enormous trees, and giant animals. They encountered a race of tall, intelligent beings, 12 feet in height, who lived in a civilization of extraordinary beauty and sophistication. These beings welcomed the Jansens and allowed them to live among them for 2 years before guiding them back to the surface through an opening near the South Pole. The Jansen account has been dismissed by most scholars as fiction, and there is no independent evidence to support any of its claims. But it is worth noting that the account was published decades before the modern Agartha legend reached a wide audience, and that it contains many of the same elements that appear in the Central Asian traditions: the inner sun, the advanced civilization, the giant inhabitants, and the polar entrances. A more recent and more ambiguous account comes from a man named Karl Hochhofer, a German general, geopolitician, and professor who was one of the most influential thinkers in the early Nazi movement. Hochhofer traveled extensively in Asia in the early 20th century, spending time in Japan, China, Tibet, and India. He became deeply involved in Eastern mysticism and is said to have been initiated into several secret societies during his travels. According to some accounts, Hochhofer visited Tibet and made contact with a secret brotherhood that claimed to represent the underground kingdom of Agartha. He is said to have brought this knowledge back to Germany, where it influenced the development of the Nazi ideology and the Nazi obsession with the occult. Hochhofer's case is complicated by the fact that he was a deeply controversial figure. His political views and his association with the Nazi regime have made him a subject of intense criticism and suspicion. But his extensive travels in Asia, his documented interest in Eastern mysticism, and his known connections to esoteric societies are matters of historical record. Whether he actually made contact with representatives of Agartha is a question that cannot be definitively answered. Another fascinating testimony comes from a man named T. Lobsang Rampa, who published a series of books in the mid-20th century claiming to be a Tibetan Lama who had been trained in the mysteries of the underground world. In his first book, The Third Eye, published in 1956, Rampa described his childhood in a Tibetan monastery, his training in psychic abilities, and his journey to underground caverns beneath the Patala Palace in Lhasa, where he encountered the preserved bodies of ancient giants lying in golden sarcophagi, surrounded by advanced technology of unknown origin. Rampa's account was enormously popular, selling millions of copies worldwide. But it was also enormously controversial because an investigation by a British newspaper revealed that T. Lobsang Rampa was actually Cyril Henry Hoskin, a plumber from Devon, England, who had never been to Tibet. Hoskin claimed that his body had been taken over by the spirit of a Tibetan Lama through a process called transmigration, and that he was writing from the genuine memories of this Lama. The claim was widely ridiculed, and Rampa Hoskin became a figure of mockery in the mainstream press. And yet his books continue to be read and discussed, and some elements of his account have proven surprisingly consistent with later discoveries. His description of underground chambers beneath the Potala Palace, for example, was confirmed in a general sense by Chinese authorities who discovered extensive underground structures during renovation work on the palace in the 1980s and 90s. And his description of the preservation of ancient bodies in underground chambers echoes a practice that is well documented in Tibetan Buddhism: the preservation of the bodies of high lamas in a mummified state, sometimes in underground crypts. The Rampa case illustrates one of the fundamental challenges of investigating the Agartha legend. The line between genuine experience, sincere belief, deliberate fabrication, and unconscious fantasy is often impossibly blurred. A single account can contain elements that are verifiably true, elements that are demonstrably false, and elements that cannot be verified or falsified with the evidence available. The temptation to dismiss all such accounts as fiction is strong, but doing so means ignoring the genuine mysteries and the genuine evidence that are woven into even the most questionable narratives. Perhaps the most credible modern accounts of encounters with the underground world come not from mystics or adventurers, but from scientists and engineers who have worked on deep underground projects. Throughout the 20th century, various governments conducted extensive underground construction projects: military bunkers, missile silos, research facilities, and transportation tunnels that extended far below the surface of the earth. Some of these projects were publicly acknowledged. Many were classified, and a number of the engineers and workers who participated in these projects have reported encountering anomalies that they could not explain. One of the most widely discussed cases involves a man who claimed to have worked as an engineer on a classified underground construction project in a remote region. According to his testimony, which was given in a series of interviews in the 1990s, the project involved drilling and tunneling to a depth that far exceeded the depth of any publicly known facility. During the drilling process, the team broke through into an existing cavity, a space that appeared to have been carved or formed long before the construction project began. The cavity was enormous, extending far beyond the reach of the team's lights and instruments. The walls of the cavity were smooth and regular, as if they had been deliberately shaped, and the air in the cavity was warm and fresh, suggesting the existence of a ventilation system or an opening to the surface that the team could not locate. The engineer reported that the project was immediately classified at the highest level, that the team was ordered not to discuss what they had found, and that the cavity was sealed off and the drilling was redirected to avoid it. He said that he was haunted by the experience for the rest of his life, and that he became convinced that the cavity was part of a much larger underground structure, a structure that had been built by someone at some point in the past for a purpose that he could not fathom. This account cannot be independently verified, and it shares many characteristics with other unverifiable claims in the Agartha tradition. But it is consistent with a pattern of reports from underground construction projects around the world, reports of unexpected cavities, unexplained sounds, unusual air currents, and other anomalies that suggest the existence of underground structures or spaces that are not accounted for in the geological record. In the 1990s and 2000s, advances in ground-penetrating radar, seismic tomography, and other geophysical technologies revealed the existence of far more underground voids and cavities than had previously been suspected. In many cases, these voids are located at depths that are beyond the reach of current exploration technology. Their size, shape, and origin remain unknown. They are simply there, dark, silent, unexplored spaces beneath the surface of the earth, waiting for someone to find them. The question of the inner sun, the mysterious source of light that is said to illuminate the underground kingdom, deserves special attention because it is one of the most fantastical and yet one of the most consistently reported elements of the Agartha legend. Every major tradition that describes the underground world specifically mentions that it is illuminated. This is a crucial detail. An underground world without light would be a world of eternal darkness, a world in which no civilization could develop, no crops could grow, and no complex ecosystem could be sustained. If Agartha exists as a functioning civilization, it must have a source of light, and the traditions are unanimous. That source is an inner sun. The idea of a sun inside the earth seems absurd by the standards of conventional science. And yet there are natural phenomena that provide intriguing analogies. Bioluminescence, the production of light by living organisms, is one of the most common and most widespread phenomena in the natural world. In the deep ocean, where sunlight cannot penetrate, the majority of organisms produce their own light through chemical reactions. The deep sea is not a world of darkness. It is a world of ghostly, flickering light, light produced by fish, jellyfish, squid, bacteria, and countless other organisms. The deep sea demonstrates that life does not require sunlight. It can create its own light. Could a similar process operate underground? Could a vast underground ecosystem produce enough bioluminescence to illuminate an entire subterranean world? The idea is speculative, but it is not impossible. Some of the largest cave systems on Earth contain thriving ecosystems, communities of organisms that have adapted to life in total darkness, developing their own food chains based on chemical energy rather than solar energy. If such ecosystems can exist in small caves, there is no fundamental reason why they could not exist on a much larger scale in the vast, unexplored cavities of the deep earth. There is another possibility, one that is even more intriguing. In 2009, a team of physicists at the Max Planck Institute published a paper suggesting that the Earth's core might produce a small amount of nuclear reactions, natural fission processes that release energy in the form of heat and potentially light. This idea is still being debated within the scientific community, but if it is correct, it raises the fascinating possibility that the deep interior of the Earth is not entirely dark, that there is a natural source of energy, and perhaps even a natural source of light deep within the planet. And then there is the phenomenon of piezoelectricity, the production of electrical charge by certain minerals when they are subjected to mechanical stress. The enormous pressures that exist deep within the Earth could potentially cause certain mineral formations to produce electrical discharges, sparks, glows, and other forms of light. This phenomenon has been observed on the surface in the form of earthquake lights, mysterious glowing phenomena that are sometimes seen in the sky before or during earthquakes, and that are believed to be caused by piezoelectric effects in the stressed rock of the Earth's crust. If piezoelectric effects can produce visible light near the surface, they could potentially produce much more intense light deep within the Earth, where the pressures are far greater. A vast underground chamber lined with piezoelectric minerals could, in theory, glow with a soft, continuous light, an inner sun produced by the natural forces of the planet itself. None of this proves that the inner sun of Agartha is real. But it demonstrates that the concept is not as physically impossible as it might initially seem. Nature has many ways of producing light, and we have barely begun to explore the vast, dark spaces inside our planet where such light might exist. The connection between Agartha and the phenomenon of unidentified submerged objects deserves further exploration, because it opens up an entirely new dimension of the underground kingdom legend. Throughout history, sailors, fishermen, and naval personnel have reported seeing strange, luminous objects moving through the water, objects that appeared to be under intelligent control, that moved at speeds far beyond the capability of any known submarine or marine vessel, and that sometimes emerged from the water and ascended into the sky, or descended from the sky and plunged into the ocean. These reports have come from every ocean and every era. Ancient Greek sailors described luminous objects beneath the surface of the Mediterranean. Medieval Norse fishermen spoke of glowing lights in the deep waters of the North Atlantic, and in the 20th and 21st centuries, military navies around the world have documented encounters with unidentified submerged objects that defied conventional explanation. The Soviet Navy, in particular, accumulated a large number of such reports during the Cold War. Soviet submarines operating in the Arctic, the Pacific, and the Atlantic reported detecting objects moving through the water at speeds of several hundred knots, far faster than any known submarine. In some cases, these objects appeared to emerge from the ocean floor itself, rising from depths that were beyond the reach of any human technology. Soviet naval intelligence maintained a classified file of these reports, and when the Soviet Union collapsed, portions of this file were made public, revealing a pattern of encounters that extended over decades and covered virtually every ocean on the planet. The connection to the Agartha legend is straightforward. If the underground kingdom has entrances on the ocean floor, and many traditions specifically describe underwater entrances to the underground world, then objects emerging from the deep ocean could be vehicles or probes from Agartha, traveling through underwater tunnels that connect the underground kingdom to the surface oceans. This hypothesis would also explain one of the most puzzling aspects of the unidentified object phenomenon, the apparent ability of these objects to transition seamlessly between air and water. Objects that can fly through the air and dive into the ocean, and vice versa, are called transmedium vehicles, and they have been documented by military personnel around the world. If these vehicles originate from an underground civilization that has had thousands of years to perfect its technology, their apparent ability to operate in multiple environments becomes less mysterious. The oceans of the world are in many ways even less explored than the surface of the Earth. More than 80% of the ocean floor has never been mapped in detail, and the deep ocean, below a depth of a few thousand meters, remains almost entirely unknown. There are underwater mountain ranges, canyons, and cave systems that have never been explored by human beings. There are vast areas of the ocean floor where the geological structure is completely unknown, and there are anomalies, unexplained sounds, unusual magnetic readings, and strange thermal patterns that have been detected by oceanographic instruments but never explained. One of the most famous of these anomalies is the so-called bloop, a powerful, ultra-low frequency sound detected by underwater microphones in the Pacific Ocean in 1997. The sound was extremely loud, much louder than any known biological or geological source, and its origin has never been definitively identified. The official explanation is that it was caused by the cracking of a large iceberg, but some researchers have questioned this explanation, noting that the acoustic profile of the bloop does not match the known signatures of ice-related sounds. Could the bloop and other unexplained underwater sounds be evidence of activity in the underground world? Could they be the acoustic signatures of underground tunnels, underground vehicles, or underground cities, transmitted through the rock and water of the ocean floor? We do not know, but the mystery remains, and it adds another layer of intrigue to the already complex tapestry of the Agartha legend. The spiritual dimension of the Agartha legend is, for many seekers, the most important dimension of all, and it is here that the legend intersects with some of the deepest and most profound questions in the history of human thought. The Kalachakra Tantra, the Buddhist text that contains the most detailed description of Shambhala, includes a prophecy that has haunted the imagination of Buddhists for centuries. The prophecy describes a time in the future when the surface world will be consumed by war, greed, and spiritual darkness. The forces of materialism and hatred will seem to triumph over the forces of wisdom and compassion. Humanity will be on the brink of self-destruction. And then, at the moment of greatest darkness, the king of Shambhala will emerge from the hidden kingdom with a vast army of enlightened warriors. The army will ride across the surface of the earth, defeating the forces of darkness in a great battle, a final, decisive confrontation between the powers of light and the powers of ignorance. After the battle, a new age will dawn, an age of peace, wisdom, and spiritual awakening that will last for thousands of years. This prophecy bears obvious parallels to the eschatological traditions of many other religions: the second coming in Christianity, the coming of the Mahdi in Islam, the arrival of Kalki in Hinduism, and the Messianic age in Judaism. The idea that history is moving toward a climactic confrontation between good and evil, after which a new and better world will emerge, is one of the most widespread and most powerful ideas in human culture. But the Shambhala prophecy adds a distinctive element to this universal theme. In the Shambhala version, the Savior does not come from heaven. He does not descend from the clouds or emerge from a supernatural realm. He comes from underground. He comes from inside the earth itself. The salvation of the surface world comes not from above but from below, from the hidden depths of the planet, where wisdom and compassion have been preserved and cultivated for millennia, waiting for the moment when they would be needed most. This geographical inversion, the idea that salvation comes from below rather than from above, is profoundly significant. It challenges our assumptions about the nature of divinity, about the structure of reality, and about the relationship between the visible and the invisible dimensions of existence. In most religious traditions, divinity is associated with height, with the sky, the heavens, the mountaintop. God is up there, the angels are above, heaven is on high. This vertical orientation is so deeply embedded in our religious and cultural thinking that we rarely question it. But the Shambhala legend inverts this orientation. It says that the highest wisdom is not up in the sky but down in the earth. The most advanced civilization is not on the surface but beneath it. The greatest spiritual achievement is not ascent but descent, a journey into the depths, into the hidden, into the interior. This idea resonates with many of the deepest traditions in human spirituality. The mystics of every tradition have spoken of the importance of going inward, of descending into the depths of the self, into the hidden chambers of the heart, in order to find the divine. The alchemists spoke of the opus, the great work, as a process of descent, of entering the darkness in order to find the light that is hidden within. The shamans of indigenous cultures describe their spiritual journeys as descents into the underworld, where they encounter spirits, gain knowledge, and return to the surface transformed. Is the Agartha legend, at its deepest level, a geographical expression of this universal spiritual truth? Is the underground kingdom a physical manifestation of the inner depths of consciousness? Is the inner sun a symbol of the divine light that is hidden within every human being, waiting to be discovered by those who have the courage to journey inward? Or is it both a physical place and a spiritual reality, existing on multiple levels simultaneously, visible to the eyes of the body and the eyes of the soul at the same time? The Tibetan Buddhist tradition would say that this question is based on a false dichotomy. The Buddhist understanding, there is no sharp boundary between the physical and the spiritual, between the outer and the inner, between the material and the immaterial. These are not separate categories, but different aspects of a single, unified reality. A place can be both physical and spiritual. A journey can be both outer and inner. And the kingdom of Shambhala can be both a real location inside the earth and a state of consciousness inside the mind, not one or the other, but both at the same time. This understanding is difficult for the Western mind to accept, trained as it is in the sharp distinctions of either or thinking. But it may be the key to understanding the full depth and significance of the Agartha legend. If we insist on forcing the legend into the categories of either real or symbolic, we may miss the possibility that it is something beyond both, something that transcends our ordinary categories and points toward a more complete understanding of reality. There is one more body of evidence that must be examined before we can draw any conclusions about the Agartha legend, and it is perhaps the most intriguing evidence of all. It is the evidence provided by the Earth itself, by the geological and geophysical data that scientists have gathered about the interior of our planet. As we discussed in Part 1, the standard scientific model of the Earth's interior describes a layered structure, crust, mantle, outer core, inner core, composed of increasingly dense materials under increasingly extreme conditions of temperature and pressure. This model is based on a wealth of seismic data, gravitational measurements, and other observations, and it has been confirmed by decades of research. There is no serious scientific doubt that the Earth has a dense metallic core, a semi-fluid mantle, and a relatively thin crust. But within this well-established framework, there are anomalies, observations that do not fit neatly into the standard model, that suggest the existence of structures or processes that we do not yet understand. We have already mentioned the vast reservoir of water discovered in the transition zone of the mantle, approximately 400 miles below the surface. This reservoir, trapped within a mineral called ringwoodite, contains an estimated 3 ocean volumes of water. Its existence was completely unexpected and suggests that the interior of the Earth may contain far more water than previously thought, water that could, in theory, support underground ecosystems or fill underground caverns of enormous size. We have also mentioned the large low shear velocity provinces, the mysterious continent-sized blobs of material at the base of the mantle that have never been satisfactorily explained. These structures are among the largest geological features on Earth, and their composition, origin, and purpose remain unknown, but there are other anomalies as well. In recent years, seismologists have discovered the existence of what they call ultra-low velocity zones, thin layers of material at the boundary between the mantle and the outer core that have seismic properties dramatically different from the surrounding rock. These zones are extremely thin, only a few miles thick, but they extend over large areas, and they seem to be associated with the bases of the large low shear velocity provinces. Some scientists have speculated that these zones are composed of partially molten rock, but others have suggested that they may be composed of entirely different materials, materials whose nature and origin we can only guess at. There is also the mystery of the Earth's magnetic field. The standard explanation for the Earth's magnetic field is the dynamo theory, the idea that the magnetic field is generated by convection currents in the liquid outer core, driven by the heat of the inner core. This theory has been broadly confirmed by observations and computer simulations. But there are aspects of the magnetic field that the dynamo theory does not fully explain, including the existence of local magnetic anomalies that cannot be accounted for by the global dynamo model, and the periodic reversals of the magnetic field, during which the north and south magnetic poles switch places. These reversals occur at irregular intervals, ranging from tens of thousands to millions of years, and their cause is not well understood. Proponents of the Agartha legend have pointed to these anomalies as evidence that the standard model of the Earth's interior is incomplete, that there are structures and processes inside the Earth that mainstream science has not yet discovered or explained. They argue that the anomalies are consistent with the existence of large, organized spaces within the Earth, spaces that could, in theory, house an underground civilization. Mainstream scientists, of course, reject this interpretation. They point out that the anomalies can be explained, or will eventually be explained, within the framework of conventional geology and geophysics. They argue that the existence of unexplained observations does not justify the leap to extraordinary conclusions like the existence of an underground kingdom. And they note that the conditions deep within the Earth, the extreme temperatures, the crushing pressures, the lack of oxygen, make it physically impossible for any form of life as we know it to exist there. These are powerful arguments, and they deserve to be taken seriously. But they are based on one crucial assumption, that we know what is and is not possible in the interior of the Earth, and the history of science teaches us that such assumptions are often wrong. 100 years ago, scientists believed that the deep ocean was lifeless, too cold, too dark, and too pressurized for any organism to survive. We now know that the deep ocean teems with life, including organisms that thrive in conditions that were previously considered lethal. 50 years ago, scientists believed that the temperature limits for life were well understood, that no organism could survive above about 80 degrees Celsius. We now know of organisms, extremophiles, that live and reproduce at temperatures above 120 degrees Celsius, in conditions of extreme acidity, extreme alkalinity, extreme pressure, and extreme radiation. Each of these discoveries expanded our understanding of what is possible. Each of them challenged assumptions that were considered settled and unquestionable, and each of them reminded us that the universe is more creative, more resilient, and more surprising than our theories predict. Could the interior of the Earth hold similar surprises? Could there be forms of life or forms of civilization that have adapted to conditions that we currently consider impossible? We do not know. But the history of science suggests that we should be humble in our certainty about what is and is not possible. Let us now step back from the evidence and the arguments and consider the Agartha legend in its totality as a cultural phenomenon, as a historical tradition, and as a statement about the human condition. The Agartha legend has endured for thousands of years. It has survived the rise and fall of empires, the coming and going of religions, the advance of science, and the retreat of superstition. It has been embraced by monks and by soldiers, by scientists and by mystics, by governments and by hermits. It has been condemned as fantasy and defended as fact. It has been used to justify political agendas and spiritual quests. It has inspired expeditions, books, films, and movements. And through all of these transformations, it has remained fundamentally the same. A story about a hidden kingdom inside the earth, illuminated by an inner sun, inhabited by beings of extraordinary wisdom, and accessible through secret entrances in the most remote and inaccessible places on the planet. What does this persistence tell us? At the very least, it tells us that the Agartha legend speaks to something deep and fundamental in the human psyche, a longing for a better world, a hunger for hidden knowledge, a desire to believe that somewhere, somehow, the problems that have plagued our species, war, disease, ignorance, suffering, have been solved. The Agartha legend is, in this sense, a mirror of our highest aspirations. It reflects our dream of what we could become if we had the wisdom and the will to create a perfect society. But it may tell us something more. The universality of the legend, the fact that it appears in virtually every culture on Earth with the same basic elements and the same basic message, suggests that it may be rooted in something more than psychology. It may be rooted in experience. It may be rooted in observation. It may be rooted in contact with something real. Consider the following scenario. Imagine that at some point in the remote past, tens of thousands of years ago, or perhaps even earlier, a civilization existed on the surface of the Earth that was far more advanced than mainstream history acknowledges. This civilization, call it Atlantis or Lemuria or some other name, possessed knowledge and technology that rivaled or exceeded our own. At some point, this civilization was threatened by a catastrophe, a flood, an asteroid impact, a shift in the Earth's crust, a change in the climate. Faced with destruction, the most advanced members of this civilization retreated underground, taking their knowledge and their technology with them. They found or created vast underground spaces where they could sustain their civilization indefinitely, and they sealed the entrances behind them, hiding themselves from the surface world that was being devastated by the catastrophe. Over the millennia that followed, the underground civilization continued to develop, undisturbed by the chaos and destruction that periodically devastated the surface. They perfected their technology. They deepened their spiritual understanding. They achieved a level of civilization that the surface world can barely imagine. And from time to time, they sent emissaries to the surface, teachers, prophets, and guides who carried fragments of their wisdom to the struggling civilizations above. These emissaries were remembered by the surface cultures as gods, as angels, as enlightened masters, as supernatural beings. The stories of their visits were preserved in myths and legends. The locations of the entrances through which they came and went were remembered as sacred places, as sites of pilgrimage, as gates between the worlds. And the underground kingdom from which they came was remembered as Agartha, as Shambhala, as Patala, as the Otherworld, a hidden paradise beneath the earth, illuminated by an inner sun and governed by a king of the world whose wisdom encompassed all of creation. Is this scenario true? We cannot say for certain. But it is consistent with the evidence, with the universal legends, with the unexplored underground spaces, with the anomalies in our geophysical data, with the persistent reports of encounters with underground beings and underground structures. It is a scenario that cannot be proven with the evidence currently available, but it is also a scenario that cannot be disproven. And as long as it remains possible, as long as the interior of the earth remains the vast, dark, unexplored mystery that it is, the Agartha legend will continue to beckon. There is a final aspect of the Agartha legend that we have not yet fully addressed, and it may be the most important aspect of all. It is the idea that the underground kingdom is not merely a passive repository of ancient wisdom, but an active force in the world, a force that is working, right now, behind the scenes of human history to guide our species toward its destiny. According to the tradition, the king of the world and the masters of Agartha do not sit idle in their underground palaces. They observe the surface world constantly. They monitor the thoughts and actions of world leaders. They influence the course of events through subtle means, through dreams, through inspiration, through the manipulation of circumstances that ordinary people attribute to coincidence or luck. They do not impose their will on humanity. They do not force us to follow a particular path, but they create conditions that make it possible for us to choose wisely if we have the wisdom and the courage to do so. This idea that there is a hidden hand guiding human history is both comforting and disturbing. It is comforting because it suggests that the chaos and suffering of human existence are not meaningless, that there is a purpose behind the apparent randomness of events, a plan behind the seeming madness of history. It is disturbing because it raises the question of who has the right to guide the destiny of an entire species without that species' knowledge or consent. The Agartha tradition would answer this question by saying that the guidance of the underground masters is not imposed from outside but arises from within. The King of the world does not control us, he illuminates us. He does not tell us what to do, he shows us what is possible. He does not choose our path for us, he lights the path so that we can choose for ourselves. This is, in essence, a vision of the relationship between the divine and the human, between the infinite wisdom that exists at the center of reality and the finite consciousness that struggles to understand it. The King of the world is not a dictator, he is a teacher, and his teaching is not delivered through commandments or dogmas but through the example of a civilization that has achieved what we have always dreamed of achieving, a society of perfect wisdom, perfect compassion, and perfect harmony. Whether this vision is true, whether there really is a hidden teacher at the center of the earth, guiding humanity with infinite patience toward its ultimate awakening, is a question that each of us must answer for ourselves. The evidence is ambiguous. The arguments on both sides are compelling. The truth, whatever it is, lies in the depths, in the unexplored interior of the earth, in the unexplored interior of the human soul, and perhaps in the mysterious space where the two meet. We have come a long way in this documentary. We have traveled from the ancient temples of Sumeria to the frozen wastes of the Arctic. We have listened to the voices of monks, scientists, explorers, and mystics. We have examined geological evidence, historical records, oral traditions, and personal testimonies. We have confronted the possibility that the world we see is only the surface of a much deeper and much more extraordinary reality. And now we must ask the final question: what do we do with this knowledge? If Agartha is real, if there truly is a kingdom inside the earth, lit by an inner sun, inhabited by beings of extraordinary wisdom, then our entire understanding of history, of science, of religion, and of ourselves must be fundamentally revised. The implications are staggering. Everything we thought we knew about the origins of civilization, about the nature of the planet, about the limits of human achievement, would need to be reconsidered. If Agartha is not real, if it is nothing more than a myth, a fantasy, a product of the human imagination, then it is still one of the most extraordinary creations of the human mind. It is a vision of what we aspire to be. It is a dream of a world without suffering, without ignorance, without the 1,000 forms of cruelty and stupidity that have defined so much of human history. And even as a dream, it has power, the power to inspire, to motivate, and to remind us that the current state of the world is not the only possible state, and that a better world is always within our reach. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between these two extremes. Perhaps Agartha is neither entirely real nor entirely imaginary, but something in between, a place that exists on the boundary between the physical and the spiritual, the literal and the metaphorical, the seen and the unseen. Perhaps it is a place that becomes more real as we become more capable of perceiving it, a place that reveals itself not to the eyes of the body, but to the eyes of the soul. The great Tibetan teacher Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, one of the most influential Buddhist teachers of the 20th century, was asked about Shambhala by a Western student. The student wanted to know whether Shambhala was a real place or a state of mind. Trungpa Rinpoche answered with a single sentence that has echoed through the years. Shambhala is the ground you are standing on. Think about that for a moment. Shambhala is the ground you are standing on, not the ground beneath the ground. Not the hidden kingdom on the other side of the world, not the place you have to travel to. The ground you are standing on, right here, right now. What if the message of the Agartha legend is not that we need to find a hidden entrance and descend into the earth? What if the message is that the wisdom we are seeking is already here, beneath our feet, beneath our assumptions, beneath the surface of everything we think we know? What if the inner sun is not a physical object inside a hollow earth, but the light of awareness that is always shining at the center of every human consciousness, hidden only by the layers of distraction and delusion that we have built up over centuries? What if Agartha is not a place we go to, but a place we become? The ancient traditions of every culture on earth point to the same truth. that there is more to reality than what we see on the surface. That the world we inhabit is layered, complex, and mysterious beyond our imagining. That beneath the surface of the ordinary there is something extraordinary waiting to be discovered. The Agartha legend is the most vivid and the most compelling expression of this truth. It is a map of the unseen. It is a compass pointing toward the hidden. It is a doorway that has been opened ever so slightly, inviting us to peer into the darkness and wonder what lies beyond. Whether Agartha exists as a physical kingdom inside the earth, or as a spiritual reality within the human soul, or as both simultaneously, the search for it is one of the noblest and most ancient quests in all of human history. It is the quest for hidden knowledge, for ultimate wisdom, for the light that shines in the deepest darkness. And that quest is far from over. The tunnels are still there. The entrances are still hidden. The inner sun is still shining, somewhere in the depths, waiting for those who have the vision to find it and the courage to follow its light. The legend of Agartha endures, and as long as there are human beings who refuse to accept the surface of things, who insist on looking deeper, digging further, asking the questions that others are afraid to ask, the legend will continue to live, because the deepest truth is always hidden, and the most important journey is always the journey inward, into the depths. Into the darkness, into the light, the world beneath our feet holds more mystery than the sky above our heads. We have mapped the surface of the moon. We have sent probes to the outer reaches of the solar system. We have photographed galaxies billions of light years away. And yet the interior of our own planet remains almost entirely unknown. We have penetrated less than a fraction of 1% of the distance to the Earth's center. Everything below that, more than 99% of the planet's volume, is beyond our reach, beyond our sight, beyond our knowledge. In that vast unknown, anything is possible. A kingdom, a civilization, a sun, Agartha. Some will say it is fantasy. Some will say it is fact, but no one on the surface of this earth can say for certain what lies in the depths below. And until we can say for certain, until we have explored every tunnel, mapped every cavern, and illuminated every darkness, the legend of Agartha will remain what it has always been, the most tantalizing, the most provocative, and the most enduring mystery in the long and extraordinary story of the human race. The entrance is waiting. The question is whether you are ready to find it.